Good morning. I'd like to call this special meeting of Council to order this morning. We do have quorum, and so we are able to operate. And welcome to the staff who are going to be very involved in the presentations this morning. A few announcements before we start. And just for the public who are visiting with us today, and welcome. We appreciate your interest. And just the washrooms are out the double doors and to the left. And we'll begin with our acknowledgement that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We come with respect for this land that we are on today and for the people who reside here. The peace and friendship treaties that were signed starting in 1725 between the Mi'kmaq and the British Crown were intended to ensure the Mi'kmaq's inherent rights to the lands, territories, and natural resources, and that it is respected and protected forever. We are all treaty people. With that, I will just outline a few things, announcements for today. We are having an issue with our live streaming, so for those people who are watching or will watch from our YouTube video, you can go to our Modal website and go to the meeting agenda, and all of the documents that will be presented today will be found there. So just for further reference. And if you have trouble with that, you can just either drop in. We can provide a hard copy for you if you're interested in the more detailed presentations that we'll receive today. There is a lot, and but those documents are all available to the public, either on our website or by dropping in here to pick up a copy. I know that there's probably some questions around why we would have a special meeting to deal with parks and our parks and this discussion we're going to have this morning. But as a new council, we identified parks as one of our priorities, strategic priorities in terms of looking at it in our infrastructure considerations. And there is a lot, we have a lot of parks, which is really to our advantage in having a community that is so rich in having parks and trails throughout. And for the newer members of our council, we all agreed that it would be important that as a group, we have a full discussion about how we see parks in our community, what we have now, what work has been done around the parks in terms of the development and the plans for parks by previous councils, because this work has been going on for many, many years, and previous councils have invested lots of money in our parks over those years, in acquiring pieces of land and in creating access for the community to get to beaches and to lakes and so forth. So we felt it was important to have that discussion and to do it in public so that people can hear our thoughts around how we see this going forward as we plan for budget and as we plan for setting our priorities over the next number of years. So with that introduction, I think I'd like to just say that this morning there's kind of, as I see it, two outcomes that we'd like to have from our discussion today. One is that we give our staff some direction in terms of the planning for the budget for 2025-2026. And they'll come back to us, and the public will have an opportunity to have a say around what they see in those documents as it comes back. So staff do need some direction as to what we see as important for the coming year. And then I think the other important part of the discussion will be how we establish some priorities around how we plan for park development over the coming years. The standards have been set, and we'll hear about those later this morning, or probably first thing this morning. The standards that have been put in place around the parks and the classifications of our park system. And that's a wonderful first step. And that level of investment by previous councils was a really valuable part of the whole process. But the next part of it is, how do we take what we've identified as the different types of parks that we have and establish some priority for how we will develop them in the years to come? So that's the second outcome, that we may not reach all our conclusions on that today, but staff will start to hear what some of our ideas are around that. And it'll also give us, on the second part, some time to think about what the ideas are, and then we can come back with, perhaps, if we can't conclude it today, we'll come back with some further direction to staff on what we see as those priorities and how we reach that and how we plan out. I would like to see us be able to set out a plan for our term, for the next 4 years, how we see those parks being developed during that time and what priorities we place on them. And I think that will be very useful for the public to see that we do have a plan for this, and they can see in their community where this might fit into their thinking in their community and how they will see it develop within their area, particular areas. So it is a big topic, and there's a lot of elements to this. So let's use today to really get the information we need and think about how we see parks and their prioritization in our work as we go forward. But we do need to give staff direction in the short term on our budget considerations for this year, and they do have some recommendations in that area. And then we can also have this bigger discussion around the priority setting for the future. So with that introduction, I will ask our Director of Parks and Recreation to Ms. Payne to take us through the presentation and lead us in the discussion that will follow.
Yes, good morning, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council members. I had written out what the intention of this morning's meeting was, and I'm not going to repeat that because the Mayor did that so eloquently. So glad we were on the same page about the outcomes for today's session. It is really about providing us some directions and priorities over the next few years. In order to do this, we plan to provide an overview of the parks and open space standards and guidelines document, which was adopted in 2023 by Council, which really has been a guiding document for the work that's been undertaken around the Recreate Parks priority, which was the priority set by the previous Council for 23-25, which was really around putting a focus on the parks that are currently in our park system and bringing those up to a standard. As the Mayor had spoken to, we are very fortunate to have a great park system. And I would say that started quite some time ago, well before I was here. And many of the parks are perhaps a result of our open space strategic plan that was developed in 2002. So that's going back a few years. We will also provide an overview. So I have a bit of an agenda. Marta is going to come up and speak to our park engagement survey results. So in 2023, we hired a summer student. We did some online surveys, and the person was out in the parks. So she's going to talk about the results that came from that, and I think you'll see how it aligns with the Parks and Open Space Standards Guideline. One of the outcomes of the Parks and Open Space Standards Guideline was around developing a maintenance program so that we could ensure that our parks were maintained at a certain standard. So Maria is going to be undertaking that part of the presentation. I should mention that this is you're going to be seeing staff from both the Recreation, Parks and Tourism Department and Engineering Department, because we work together to ensure that the parks meet a certain standard and delivering the services to our residents. And then I think it was in 2024, we hired a firm that we worked closely with in 2023-24 to conduct accessibility audits on 5 of our parks. Maria will be presenting that as well. And again, you'll see how that ties with the Parks and Open Standards Guideline. Then I'm going to just talk a little bit about the parks priorities in 23-25 and the projects that we implemented so that you get a breadth of what was done in those 2 years on around that priorities. Active transportation, we did put in a couple of slides for that, and although it's not parks, and we understand that the intention of today is to really look at the parks priority, not at active transportation, but we did want to put a couple of slides in just because it could impact the capital budget as well. As our department does handle active transportation and the implementation of those capital projects. And then staff, I met with staff both in the engineering and Recreation Department, and the recommendations that's being brought forth are some of those capital projects that we think council should consider for 25, 26, and then taking that longer view, as the mayor had said. The last two slides that was in the PowerPoint, I listed the number of groups that we have management agreements with. So these management agreements are with nonprofit community groups that have developed parks and managed parks on land that's owned by the municipality. So we very much still see them very much as part of the overall park system in the municipality, and they contribute significantly to that system. And then on the last slide is our trails and ATV associations, and I included those because, again, trails may not be specifically a park, but it does play into the park system, and we have a number of nonprofit groups that are managing trails on our behalf, and we do contribute, or we have traditionally budgeted funds and are operating to help them with their day-to-day operations and capital upgrades. So those were just things I want you to think about as we go through the presentation. There will be an opportunity as we go through each one for questions. So if I could just ask, as we do each category, if people have questions, if they want to write them down, we'll open the floor to questions, and then we'll continue that. And then, of course, the discussion will begin around the priorities and the direction for staff. So the Parks and Open Space Standards and Guidelines document is what I'll be focusing on right now, and I have to say that I have to give a lot of credit to Marta, who spent a lot of time developing this document. She did research, which really we found that there's not a lot of municipalities that have a document such as what was created in the municipality. So when we were working together, we looked at a classification system which really classifies which category the parks would fall within, and I'll go through those. We have a number of categories. It really defines the intended purpose of the document, which is really to clarify the standard that we want to reach and the amenities that should be included in each park and the minimum standards that we want to reach. And the Parks and Spec Standards document looks at the accessibility considerations that we should be thinking about in each one of the parks. We're all aware that there's accessibility legislation that we need to be striving to make an accessible Nova Scotia by 2030. So when we developed the park standards, we thought about that and the balancing between environment and accessibility considerations. And I believe at the council meeting the other day, when there was discussion around, we're trying to look at that accessibility lens when we're developing our parks or upgrading our parks. So the categories, there's a number of park categories, which the regional park, destination park, neighborhood park, a parkette, conservation land, and sport park. One of the things I would like to say, and I'm not following my notes very well, is that all of our documents are living documents. So this is a living document. It doesn't mean to say that this is going to stay the way that it always is, or there could be some parks, depending on the direction of council, that might get switched into which classification system or which category we have. That I would say that's the same with any of our documents, like our active living strategy, our active transportation plan. They're living documents, and these are really the intention to guide council in decision making. So I want to clarify that. So a regional park, as defined in our standards document, it really defines a large multi-use park, provides for either active or passive recreation opportunities, has significant built amenities, and attracts users not just from the immediate neighborhood, but from all over. So we have three regional parks. We have our Municipal Activity Recreation Complex, which is better known as the MARC. And I would say that this is probably one of the signature parks that is well known, not only across Lunenburg County or the province, but beyond. We have River Ridge Common, which was an investment that council made some time ago, a few years ago, where we had community consultation. We used to have an advisory committee, and there was a concept plan, and it was developed over an implementation process. And I would say that it is definitely a regional park, and a lot of people come from all over for the mountain biking, for the playground. It has definitely established itself as a regional park. And we have Wiles Lake Park. And the reason why this is in the regional parks is we really, from staff's perspective, and council agreed when we made the presentation, that this is really an opportunity that we could develop this park. It has a clean slate. It could possibly be, and again, this is a decision of council, that one accessible park that's defined in our amenities. Again, that would be a decision of council, but we were very conscious when we looked at the regional park that we wanted to have at least one of them to be accessible. So in each category, we have amenities and what we want for wayfinding. And the amenities listed in the regional parks is open year-round, washroom or an outhouse of some type, waste receptacles, dog waste station, 10 defined parking spaces, accessible park furnishings, at least one accessible park, and one accessible playground in this category. So what the check marks represents is what we've achieved to date. So that will give you an idea of where we need to be going when it comes to developing our regional parks. And wayfinding is, we want to ensure that we have a park gate, which is basically that welcoming gate when you are here, you know, this is the park that you're at, a park beacon, which lists our rules and regulations, a vehicular directional signs directing people from the roadway of how to get to our park, and an interior kiosk that would have information, mapping, and things of that nature. Destination park. Is a park that highlights an attraction that either has a natural feature or a built amenity. So this means people are coming, this is what's really attracting them. And the destination parks that's currently in this category is Church Lake, Hurdles Beach, Indian Falls, Indian Path Common, Miller Point Peace Park, Mush Mush Beach Park. Pine Grove Park was put in that category, and this is why I'm saying it's a living document. And at the time of this document, it was a destination park because most people were coming for the outdoor skating rink. And as we know, that has been removed due to safety concerns. And then, of course, Saw Pit Wharf. It is one of our main feature marine park, I would say, that people use for boating in the ocean. And then our wayfinding features. And the reason I'm going over through each one of these, when Marta speaks to the surveys, you'll see why some of these were categorized and why some of the recommendations we're making. So each document does tie into each other and hopefully provide some guidance for decision making. And then we have our neighborhood parks, and that we've defined these as parks that serve as open space needs of local residents. So it's really intended to be accessed by active transportation. So it's truly neighborhood. I should be able to walk to it, cycle to it. I mean, you can still drive to it, but it's meant to be that neighborhood feel. And the amenities in a neighborhood park would be that 25% are open year-round, 25% with seasonal outhouse or porta potty, waste receptacles, 10% in this category would provide parking, and at least 20% in this category would provide accessible park furnishings. So we're trying, again, balancing, looking through the accessibility lens, recognizing that we may not be able to achieve complete accessibility, but there is a standard of accessibility that we want to achieve. And the neighborhood parks would be Lehave Sunset Park, Maliga Lake Park, our Petite Riviere Community Park. And one of the things I will say, when you see an asterisk on any of these parks, that means these are the ones that we have management agreements with or stewardship agreements, so other people managing them on our behalf. So also in the neighborhood park category is the Rose Bay Marine Park and our United Communities Marine Park. And then our wayfinding, these would be the minimum standards when we implement the wayfinding strategy. And then the parkette is really a small piece of property or a park, and hence the word parkette, because it might not look like a park, but a small piece of land that provides passive recreational opportunities. So it can be a resting, a gathering space, include landscapes, gardens, or access to water. And so we do have a number of parkettes, which is the Indian Point Rest Point, our Masons Beach Access, our Sand Dollar Beach, Sucker Lake, Tancook Island Park, and the West Havers Beach. And again, the amenities, as you'll notice, the amenities lessen as you get into neighborhood and parkettes. The amenities is to be seasonal, and 10% in this designation will provide parking spaces. There's some areas that do pose challenges for us to provide parking spaces, and it really just provides the access. And then we have a category called conservation land, and this was land that's been acquired for the purposes of conserving, protecting, or restoring a significant ecosystem, habitat, or species. And again, we have a number of conservation lands. So our Cape LaHave Islands is one of our significant ones. We have the newly established Oakland Conservation Area, which we have a stewardship agreement with MICA, Oxnard's Beach, and the Showback lands. And the minimum standards is from an amenities point, there's none because the purpose is to keep it, to protect it, and to conserve it. And then we created a category called sports parks, which is land developed as a venue for athletic or sports teams' activities and events. And again, the amenities is to provide parking and washrooms. Now, these again are minimum standards, and I want to stress that. It does not mean that council can't exceed those minimum standards. In some cases, we will have exceeded those minimum standards. So under the sport park category, we have the center soccer fields, and we have our municipal activity recreation complex, which has the Mark Ball fields. And pickleball courts were included in this category because at the time, council was looking at building pickleball courts. Based on the presentation that was made at the Policy and Strategy Committee, if we move forward with the management agreement with the South Shore Pickleball Club, they would be, again, managing a piece of property that's owned by the municipality, and there'd be a management agreement. So you might, as we change this document, you might see an asterisk in the future, or it may get removed depending on what happens with the pickleball courts, but it would fall very much into the sport park category. So that some of the next steps that we plan that are in the park standards document is to create an implementation and evaluation strategy. So we already done that, and really part of this priority and direction setting is to help create that implementation, and then it will be part of staff's responsibility to continue to evaluate, to make sure that we're meeting the standards, getting feedback from the public, altering our maintenance standards if we need to, so that we're providing that service and ensuring that we're monitoring it and evaluating it to ensure that we're providing that service. And then to develop an asset management strategy, which is in progress, to make sure that we're maintaining our assets, which ties into the next one, which is to complete the life cycle audits for park amenities. So part of the planning and the direction of council and the decision making, and part of our role as staff, is to say, okay, this washroom only has another 5 years of life. You need to be thinking about replacing that within the next 5 years. And so that's very much something that engineering is helping us with as well. Conduct a recreation use needs assessment and gap analysis. So we started this a bit with the park survey, which was conducted in 2023, which gave us a lot of information and feedback, but we still need to develop if there's gaps, and again, that would be some of the responsibility of staff to bring the information to council so that they can make decisions. And then one of those outcomes was to establish a pest and invasive species control policy, which we haven't begun yet, but it is within our work plan, and to establish a commemorative parks program, which is in progress. And Sandra Chalice is working on that now, and I suspect that will be something that will be brought forth to council in the next couple of months to consider a policy. We have a number of people ask if they can put a plaque on one of our benches in memory of someone, and we really don't have, it's been done ad hocly, so we really don't have a policy in place, and so that's what we're looking at. So that is, sorry, I spent a bit of time, and it might have been very familiar to some of you, but we wanted to really go through what was in the park standards at a high level. And are there any questions at this point around the park standards document? As I had said, that has really been our guiding document with the Recreate Parks priority and where the investments has happened in the last 2 years.
I just have one question, unless someone at councilors have a question. On the conservation land piece here, can you, and maybe it's a question for somebody other than yourself, but how will that fit into our zoning and our long-term planning strategy? And what protection do we have as a municipality really to over any further development in that? Will that come under our planning strategy?
Yeah, the municipality has a range of tools that you can use. to try and conserve land. So ownership is one of them, absolutely. The province has some tools, the most prominent being a conservation easement program where homeowners can, or property owners can decide to get a conservation easement which protects the land, and then the municipality gets a grant in lieu of the taxes because the value of the land goes down when there's no future development. And then you can also look at different zoning measures so that you prevent, as you've done in some coastal areas, infilling into sensitive wetlands, for example. Coming in 2025, we do have a conservation policy for council to consider, which was asked for by the previous council. So you'll be looking at establishing a policy which will guide how you will go about conserving land in the future.
Okay. All right, and up next is Maria's going to just come and talk a little bit about the maintenance standards program that was created as a result of the park standards. And this is really at, oh, sorry, I think there's another question.
Sorry, I did wave, but no one was looking at that moment. I I just want to ask while we're on the conservation slide, is there any consultation with the Mi'kmaq on what we're conserving and drawing from their knowledge when we're looking identifying lands to conserve?
I'm going to pass that down.
Again, in your draft policy, which you'll be seeing later in the year, we do address a little bit of that, but to this point it's been ad hoc when we're able to gain attention. We're in a slightly difficult position because we are surrounded by Acadia First Nation, but we don't have any actual Acadia First Nations land in the municipality, and they span several municipalities. So we assume they are bombarded by requests for engagement and information, and it's been difficult for us to build that relationship. But we are looking at alternatives, and we're quite hopeful with the Ulnaweg Center running the Assi-Dulisk facility that we'll have a different avenue to have access to elders and Indigenous information.
And I do know, sorry if I can just respond to that as well, I do know that in some of the acquisitions from the province, there certainly was an engagement process, like you need to reach out and provide the opportunity for input. So I know with like Oxnard's Beach and when we acquired Wiles Lake as well, in fact, there was an archaeology study when we were looking at Oxnard's Beach. We actually hired somebody that was part of the process. And I do know that the Kingsburg Coastal Conservancy, with a lot of their lands, they have been very engaging with the Indigenous community. So we might not be doing it directly, but many of our partners, so I just wanted to emphasize that.
Councillor Brooks.
Regarding Oxnard's Beach, you said you had hired a consultant. What kind of community consultation happened regarding Oxnard's Beach?
I don't think there was extensive community consultation, other than I know that the council for the area for a number of years was wanting Oxnard's Beach because there was community interest in having Oxnard's Beach in the community. But I was here at that time. There was very limited community consultation.
Because what my concern is, as one of the few assets in my district, to have it put into conservation status is a bit problematic. I don't know if you've been there in the summertime, but it's a flooded mosquito vector, which is something we don't need in our community. So I think, I don't know if we're getting into that now, but this is certainly a piece of property that I think we need to revisit and not just have it put onto conservation. If we're going to do that, then shut it completely, take the parking out, take everything out so that the community knows that it's not to be used by the community, and I'm not in support of that.
Again, as I said, this is a living document, and we take direction from council. At this point in time, that is the category that it's in, but I'll just leave it at that for now. All right, so are there any other questions around the park standards document? All right, then Maria is going to just take you very quickly at a very high level around the maintenance standards, because that's really at an operational level, but we just wanted to share that with council. Flick through to get to your page.
Great, thank you. So as Trudy mentioned, After the implementation of the park standards and guidelines and the adoption by council, the Recreation and Engineering Department came together to work on a maintenance standard to complement that, wanting to make sure that our parks were safe, clean, and welcoming to the public and all the users. So when we were developing the park standards, some of the considerations that went into the standards were wanting to make sure we were in alignment with the adopted document and that we were ensuring we were reflecting council's priorities and what we heard. We wanted to focus on routine and preventative maintenance, so making sure we had set maintenance cycles and we were working on preventative maintenance and building in efficiencies and cost savings into that maintenance model. And as well as an outcome, we wanted to ensure we had increased presence in our spaces, so we had the ability to identify potential concerns or deficiencies and address them in a timely manner. So just looking at some of the high-level maintenance categories that our park staff take care of throughout the year on a daily basis, we have waste and litter collection, washroom cleaning and sanitizing, and that would be a variety of washrooms, whether it be porta potties that are rented for our spaces or fixed vaults in our spaces. We have open space care, which really defines our green spaces, so mowing, string trimming, tree care as well in that category. And then we have a very robust trail maintenance category as well. We have a number of trails in our parks and open spaces. We have a sport park maintenance category as well. There's very specialized maintenance requirements for sites such as our ball fields. And then, of course, we have our access routes and parking lots into our sites that have to be maintained and cared for. We have a very defined inspection and condition assessment category as well, frequencies where we require very robust safety inspections and then ongoing condition assessments. And then site-specific requirements. So those are unique elements, such as installation of floating docks at our locations like Church Lake and Saw Pit Wharf. We have playground inspections. We have a certified playground inspector that conducts those on staff. And then we have our sign maintenance, making sure everything's always clean, legible, straight, and replaced as required. And then our winter maintenance category as well. So just looking at a few examples for maintenance and implementation of this standard. So we took a year to assess conditions and implement trial standards before we came to a decision on frequencies for our routine maintenance. And again, this is assessed annually and throughout the season as patterns of use change from our users accessing our spaces. And as we add or remove amenities and features within the spaces, we adjust the required maintenance as well. So looking just a snapshot of trail maintenance. So really on the right-hand side, we see a trail condition that's desirable. We have consistent surfacing, no erosion on your trail surface to remove any sort of safety hazards there. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining that standard, cleaning our ditch lines, cross culverts, so we can keep water in the ditch line where it is intended to be and not on the trail surface, creating erosion and hazards. So this is part of that preventative maintenance example. Some other work that was done with regard to bringing conditions up to a higher standard within the spaces, just implementing some consistent surfacing over time. We get a lot of wave and water action in a number of our sites, so it tends to remove some of those materials, and so we've worked to bring those back up to a safe standard. And again, another example of works undertaken at Saw Pit Wharf in this category, and very similar at Sand Dollar Beach. Another part of the process for developing the maintenance standards was starting to assess the conditions of some of the features that existed in the spaces. So we did some risk management. And really the idea behind this is to, as it was mentioned in the standards, to come up with that implementation evaluation strategy, asset management, to make sure that we are identifying concerns with features and removing them and replacing them before they become a hazard. So all of these things are just examples. So that playground features that are photographed there are the former Mark ball field playground, which of course has been replaced, and then a number of our park benches, which have also been replaced as part of this evaluation process. And then there's a side shot of the Indian Falls stairs, again, which has been replaced as well. So that was just a really high-level snapshot of our maintenance standards. I'm not sure if there's any questions.
Not seeing any, so, oh, sorry. I must be blind this morning. Ella, Counselor Smith.
One of our lenses that we discussed just a couple days ago at our policy and strategy meeting was climate. And I just wondered, when you're talking about evaluating risks, are you also looking at climate risks and resiliency and how we're taking care of our parks and even how we're planning our parks? Because, some of these parks are right on the shoreline and we're having stronger and stronger weather events.
Yeah, a great example of that was down at Hurdles Beach. The other season, we had a massive storm event, and the water was all the way on the other side of the parking lot. It tore up a lot of our existing boardwalk and eroded underneath. So certainly we're seeing more impacts within the spaces, and that does impact the maintenance and some of the damage to some of those features. So certainly that has to be continually evaluated and looked at. And I know you mentioned on the planning side of things, that's where some of that considerations for climate and the shifts there are coming into play. But at this time, for the park staff, we're focused on implementing the maintenance standards, but we are seeing some of those impacts and having to increase some of our frequencies and checks in our spaces as a result, even looking at the extreme rainfall that we had the other year as well. That had devastating impact on a lot of our trails, which was driving the need for enhanced ditching, upsizing cross culverts. We're just seeing heavier and heavier rainfall. And so we've been monitoring that, and since we've had some of those improvements done and we've had following events, we've seen that they have been effective. But again, we're having to continually evaluate that. It's a good point.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add to that with Maria's example of Hurdles Beach. That had been identified as a priority, and we were planning on doing work at Hurdles, but because after that big event happened, we pressed pause on that project because we didn't feel we should go forward at that time without further planning and looking at what maybe be the best thing given what happened with that storm, that maybe that wasn't the best way to spend money into that in that space.
Right, so I will pass it over to Marta, who's going to talk about the park engagement survey.
Okay. So as mentioned, in 2023, we conducted some park surveys. So we hired a summer student to come in for that season, and the primary purpose of that role was to engage with users to determine what's happening in our spaces, who's using our spaces, how are they using our spaces, and what improvements can be done within our spaces. So Erin came in, and over the course of the summer, she visited all of our parks and open spaces and to engage with users. And there is a report that was included in your package that kind of details exactly the results that we got from all of that work. And over the course, so she went to every space, and we determined very quickly that some of the spaces were easier to interact with people. Some places aren't. So places like River Ridge, where it's a great big trail network, even though it's one of our bigger spaces, it's really hard to find people in a 100-acre park to talk to them, to get feedback. So she then pivoted a little bit and started visiting spaces more based on places where she could actually interact with users. So out of that, we had she interviewed 174 people in our parks and got some very site-specific feedback with that. At the same time, we also launched our online surveys, and with a combination of the in-person and the online responses, we had 309 survey responses, so we were pretty pleased with that number. At the beginning of the project, we thought success would look like if we had 200 responses, so to get over 300 responses from the two processes was pretty good, and we got a lot of great feedback on that. So first was who responded. And as indicated, we had 309 participants, and of those 309 participants, 77% indicated that they live within MODL. The average person to complete a survey was between the ages of 40 to 69, living in a two-person household and employed with a bachelor's degree. The first question asked in the online survey, participants were asked to choose the spaces they had visited within the last year. And as you can see, Hurdles Beach, Miller Point Peace Park, and Mark are in those top 3. After that, we asked participants what their favorite spaces are. So they were asked to rank their top 3 favorite spaces. And so there's a little bit of a shift here. And so Hurdles Beach is still number 1, Miller Point Peace Park is the 2nd, and River Ridge moves into the 3rd. As well, closely following is Mark. And then in that 5th space, it's kind of even between Mush, Indian Falls, Sand Dollar, and Indian Path Commons as well. We also asked individuals to rank their favorite places. So it shows us what the most frequently visited and favorite MODL spaces are: Hurdles Beach, Miller Point Peace Park, River Ridge Common, and the Marg. So here we've learned from this, we saw where people are going, what their favorite parks are, and then we asked them, why are you visiting these spaces? And so on this slide, you'll see this is a combination of the in-person and the online survey results of why people are into our spaces. So a lot of passive recreational opportunities, so picnic, swimming, bird watching, kayaking, access to water, and such. So then, after this, we separated the information out, or going forward, you're going to see we'll do in-person and online survey results, and when it was possible, we've combined those answers into one slide. Originally, we had asked people in the in-person surveys, we were trying to get a broad perspective on parks. That was very difficult because we were talking to somebody in a park. They wanted to talk about the park that they were in. So we got some very specific feedback on parks that people were surveyed in. Online, people are asked to their responses to gauge them towards the top 3 places that they had chosen. So wayfinding. Through our in-person surveys, we learned that 80% of people through the park, 80% of the people thought the park wayfinding signs were well placed and easy to comprehend. Some acknowledged some positive improvements to our park wayfinding over the past year, which is a nod to the implementation of the wayfinding strategy. In the online survey, which is represented here, this drops to a bit to 72% of the people finding the park signs easy to very easy to find and understand. What we heard with parking. 96% of in-person surveys stated that they were able to park in a designated parking lot. Only 6 people had not been able to find parking on that day, and 5 of these participants were surveyed at Sand Dollar Beach, which we already know poses parking challenges there. This dropped slightly online, where 80% reported usually being able to find a parking spot in their favorite space. Bathrooms and waste bins. So before, this is with regards to the in-person surveys, so before asking their opinion for the in-person surveys, they were asked if they generally use these amenities, and 55% of the people said yes. So of those 55%, 80% reported the bathrooms were clean, and 97% reported the waste bins were well kept, meaning that garbage wasn't overflowing, that they were, well maintained. In our online surveys, participants were asked to rank both the location and the cleanliness of bathrooms. 43% indicated the bathrooms were easy to very easy to find, and over 60% ranked them always to usually clean, with 26% selecting not applicable, meaning they don't use our bathrooms. Of those that reported impossible to find, 5 had listed Hurdle Beach as their top location. So what this tells us, and kind of reflects back to the wayfinding, is when you pull into Hurdles Beach, you walk towards the beach, and nowhere does it say, look behind you, there's bathrooms. So we don't have any signage there to direct people to the washrooms, so that we feel that these comments were reflective of that. In the online surveys, participants reported the location of the waste bins and the dog waste stations as easy to somewhat easy to find. Overall, there were very few complaints across all spaces regarding bathrooms and waste receptacles. Seating. When asked how easy it is to find a place to sit on a scale of impossible to very easy, the responses were quite varied. And then looking further into this, the not so easy or impossible to easy was Hurdles and Miller Point Peace Park. And then again, if you've visited Miller Point Peace Park, you'll notice that in one side of the park, you go down one time trail and there's bench. You can use the park, and on the other side, we hardly have, well, we just did add some new benches, but there's hardly any seating on the other side. So this comment really, I think, speaks to the distribution of our seating and our benches within our spaces. Both in-person and online participants were asked what, if anything, was needed to improve our spaces and what was missing. So combining all the 309 survey results, this is what we heard. 15% requested more or improved washrooms. 3% of these specifically mentioned flushed washrooms. 11% requested more seating. They would like it more dispersed throughout the spaces, and with requests for more picnic tables or more seating in shaded areas. 10% would like improved wayfinding signs, and many of these comments were around our internal wayfinding. 9% mentioned they would around improved parking, and the majority of these comments were in relation to hurdles and sand dollars. Also, we had comments on the layout of our parking lots and the surface conditions of our parking lots. 9% would like more waste bins or dog waste stations. And we weren't surprised with any of these results. As we were conducting these surveys, we had just finished the park standards. We were beginning implementation, and these were all things that we already were focusing our attention on. To gain a better understanding of accessibility and the challenges within our spaces, we asked participants if they've ever experienced challenges with accessibility or barriers to participation in MODL spaces. So of the 309 surveyed, 13% indicated facing difficulties around accessibility in MODL spaces. The information suggests that there is a noteworthy segment of the population that aren't comfortable to access our spaces, so that we have some work to do there. We heard concerns around unsafe or uneven ground, seating and rest areas and signage, so improved signage, better seating or more seating, and then the ground condition on some of the trails. We had very specific comments on hurdles at Hurdles Beach and Sand Dollar, with challenges of accessing the beaches or the boardwalks being covered in rocks. We had very specific comments on Miller and uneven trail surfaces, and specific comments about not enough rest areas along trails. So these comments, we had also had comments on our signage or not enough information on our signs, and information about trail distances and elevation changes. And that is a very high-level view of our park engagement survey. Is there any questions on that?
Councillor Vino and then Councillor Bell.
Thank you. The first time that this was presented to the previous council, I felt the same way, and I want to cautious council on making decisions based on this survey of their favorite places out of a population of probably, 26,000. 309 isn't a lot. I think that the favorite places also takes, in fact, the survey was done in the summertime as well. So Hurdles Beach would be the most popular one, but we have year-round parks, and then the parks or amenities on the bottom won't see a lot of people because there's not amenities there. I wouldn't expect to see a high level of people at Wiles Lake Park necessarily. So we have to weigh that survey out with our decisions that we make and where we want to put time and resources. Just my opinion.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question. 9% people have identified parking as a concern to them. One particular amenity, Hurdles Beach. Are you able to tell me how many parking facilities are currently available for that facility?
It's not, yeah, sorry. The parking at Hurdles isn't delineated, so we don't actually have spaces marked out there, so it's really how people park when they arrive at that space.
Okay. The second part of that question or comment is that I understand, and maybe the councillor for the area can speak better to it, is that some people may be parking on the highway or maybe creating unsafe conditions, which has become a concern to the local residences. Are you hearing that, or has that got through to you yet? Like, I'm only trying to identify that this is an issue that some of us heard. Yesterday, some people from the community came and spoke to one of the committee meetings that I participate in. So I just want to make sure that it is on your radar, and then ask, what can we do to help remedy this?
Yes, parking is a concern at Hurdles when you're there on a busy day. On a hot summer's day, parking is people are parked along that road for sure. Is there a remedy to that? Well, yes, and that's part of the standards of delineating parking spaces would help with that. But to expand parking in that is not, we are really have a small piece of land. It is surrounded by wetland in there, and you have private land on one side and then ocean on the other. I don't know if you want to further add to that at all.
No, you pretty much spoke to it, and I know that when Public Works was paving that road, there was discussion around them putting parking signs on one side of the road to allow for additional parking. And that was a discussion that was had quite some time ago. But as Marta has indicated, we are limited to the land that we owned. We really don't have much options to expand on that land. And so part of that in the park standards is how can we make more efficient use of the space that we do have for parking. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, parking has definitely been raised a number of times, not only with Hurdles Beach, but a few other spaces.
Yeah, another one we hear parking about is Sand Dollar, and that's another one as well where we don't have any more options there either to expand parking.
Councillor Smith.
I might have more to say about this topic later on in the meeting, but were you surprised to see Sherbrooke Lake on the most frequently visited spaces list? Because it's not on the map, and it's totally undeveloped, and how are people accessing it, and how did it end up in the survey results?
I believe that, and I would have to go back because this is now, I'd have to go back and answer, to look exactly how that ended up in there, but I believe it might have come out of people like under other and people adding that to that. So people are aware, like some people are aware that Sherbrooke Lake, there is municipal property there. We don't advertise it. It's not very accessible. You really need to know where you're going, but there are people that do access that space.
Other questions? Oh, Councillor Vino.
Just to Councillor Smith's point, that could have come out of the online part of it and somebody in that community that was aware of it and they wanted to get that on the list.
Okay. Whatever's next is next.
All right, back again. I'm going to be talking about the park's accessibility audits. So of May of 23, the park accessibility audit project was awarded to EXP, and the consultant conducted audits in 5 of our parks and was supported by an internal staff committee. So the scope of the work involved, again, conducting audits on 5 municipal parks using the Rick Hansen system that measures the level of meaningful access to buildings and spaces. So just important to note, it's a tool and it's subjective to the auditor. And what it does is it applies a score to each park based on the available amenities and the existing conditions in each space. So the 5 parks where the audits were conducted were Hurdles Beach, Mushumash Beach Park, Miller Point Peace Park, River Ridge Common, and Indian Falls. So the outcome of the project was a report indicating how each park scored using this system, and it provided a list of options of projects that could be undertaken to increase points and work towards accreditation, of course, if this was a desire of council. And it also provided some high-level concept plans to enable readers just to visualize some of those proposed enhancements. And again, just to note that the report is a planning tool to help guide discussions around accessibility and some of those options that could be undertaken in the spaces. So you will see on the following slides a menu of options that came out as an outcome of projects that could be implemented. There's a range of low to medium to high cost projects, and there is a lot of shared themes between all of the spaces. All of the 5 spaces scored very similarly, and you will see consistent themes. So themes around parking, so improving parking. None of our spaces have designated accessible parking. Also themes around amenities, so those accessible benches, picnic tables, things like that, as well as themes around washrooms or availability of accessible washrooms, whether they be vaults, toilets, or full washrooms. So it just want to note that on June 11th of 2024, the consultant with EXP, the lead there, Stacey Muse, did come to council. You might remember that presentation he gave. It was quite robust. There was a lot of good question and answer through that presentation, and at that session, council did adopt the report. So again, just on the following slides, it just lays out some of those recommendations. And again, these are just Class D estimates, so they should be taken with a grain of salt. There's a broad range that would apply if any of these were to go forward. So again, looking at some of those themes, so in that low to medium cost category, again, we could designate accessible parking stalls, provide accessible amenities like picnic areas, bike racks, bins, internal wayfinding, accessible signage was another shared theme across all of the spaces. Could do some upgrades to our existing toilets to make them more accessible. And to that point in discussion that was just had around parking, we could delineate parking in our spaces. So with that, it helps guide people and how they position themselves in a parking lot. So, I'm sure everyone has experienced that frustration when you go into a lot and someone's on an angle and, blocking out, or if they had just parked that much closer, you could fit, 5 more cars. So that's what that is indicating for that delineation of the parking that's available and maximizing the use of space. And specific to this category for Hurdles Beach would be to focus on providing access to the key feature, which of course is the ocean frontage. So beach overlook, looking to rebuild the boardwalk to be more accessible to get people to the ocean front. And in that high cost option, looking at things like paving parking lot that does lend itself to better delineation, where you can pave the parking lot and paint lines. And then in the high cost options, looking at a beach lookoff and a ramp down to the beach itself. So for Miller Point, I won't repeat some of those shared theme project options that exist here, like the designated parking and the amenities, but specific to Miller, it's a natural setting, lots of trails. So some of those unique project options here would be to improve the trail surfacing, to be more consistent and adjust the grade to allow it to be more accessible and create a more accessible access to some of those internal trail loops. In that high cost option, one of the things that came up was access to the trails from the outer parking lot. Right now, users have to walk along the road, so there's a conflict of space between vehicles that drive through and the users that walk to get access from the outer parking lot to the inner trails. So for River Ridge Common, again, some shared themes. Some unique elements for this space with project options would be providing access to the top section of the park. So for everyone that's been there, you park at the bottom and there's a switchback that's quite a steep grade to get to the top, where you have the playground as well as the upper trail system. And so one of the high cost project options there would be to actually provide accessible parking at the top close to the playground. We do have an access road for maintenance purposes that could be developed, and enhancing some of the washroom facilities, and again, creating some accessible trail options once you were to get to the top of the park. For Indian Falls, again, we would be looking at some of those trail enhancements, adjusting some grades to make them the grade more accommodating for users with accessibility challenges, as well as options for the parking, again, paving parking, delineation of parking areas, and creating some more accessible amenities like a shade shelter picnic area and smoothing out the surface for walking trails. So moving into Mush Mush Beach Park. The couple of the options that are unique to this space, just regarding the beach access, so this is your lake frontage. We do have off-highway vehicles that can access the park even when the gate is closed from the back. So they do tend to tear up the beach, and so wanting to maintain that and provide that consistency surfacing through the site, we could block access, providing accessible furnishings in the space. And on that higher cost option, we could be looking at accessible flush washrooms, change rooms at the site. That came up as an element from the public that would be appreciated, as well as readjusting the layout of the space. So right now, there's a number of different parking options that exist, but they're separated from one another, and it's not the best use of space. So we could adjust the layout to accommodate more vehicles and users in the space. So that was one of the higher cost project options here for Mush Mush Beach Park. So again, just some shared themes that came up for those projects. It is a planning tool to have discussions around some things that could be done, and every element that you would implement if Rick Hansen certification was something that council was interested in. You make one of those improvements, it gives you more points, and for those accreditations, you would need 60% of available points to be accredited, 80% to be accredited gold, and what that does, it gives you that information on your wayfinding for the public to say, you are an accredited space. So again, a planning tool for council.
Okay, questions on that? Councillor Hubley, Councillor Brooks, and then Councillor DeLong.
Just a quick question. Were the washrooms at Mush Mush, was that upgrade completed?
No. Yes,
Okay,
so that will come up
fair
on the
enough.
following slides.
Fair
Yes.
enough.
Councillor Brooks?
Do we have some numbers? For example, our most accessible park, do we have some numbers of how many individuals who need that access are presently being served?
I don't know if we have that information. Could you repeat the question?
Do we know how many park users who need extra accessibility have been using the parks?
I know we have some information that came out of the park survey results indicating, and I don't have the numbers from those, that there were people that had challenges.
I saw that, yeah, it was
Yes.
13% of 360 or 320, I think.
But in terms of that specific information, we didn't have that available.
Do we know what the need is within the district? Within the municipality?
Again, I will respond if I can, yeah. So part of the information came through the park survey. Are we going out and counting the number of people or doing anything like that? No. From a province-wide Nova Scotia, from an accessibility and people that are living with disabilities is higher than the Canadian average. So that's another statistic that we often use. I would also probably input that some people aren't visiting our parks because they're not accessible. And so the question that I would have in my own mind is how do we get information from those that aren't accessing it, but would if it was available. And I guess I would defer a little bit to Jeff, who's our Director of Planning. Often you try to plan which is the 0 to 80 rule, I think, or maybe I have that wrong, that you plan for basically anybody can use the park. And if you design it well, whether you have a disability or not, you're going to be able to use it. And that's really the lens that we look through, is the accessibility and how do you plan for your entire population. As if you make it accessible to if you make it accessible to everybody, it's accessible to everybody. I'm sure if that answers your question, but that's the lens we
I guess I'm thinking with our limited resources, are we able to turn all of our parks into high accessibility parks? Is it more feasible or wise to pick a number of them which are already ripe for accessibility and to expand that and make those destination parks for individuals who have that specific need? The reason I ask about numbers is I want to know who we're serving. I understand the provincial mandate. I understand the federal mandate. My concern is, who are we serving? are we meeting the needs? I know we're building to meet needs, but I want to know if we're meeting needs. So it's speculative, and I know it's good-hearted. I'm just curious if it's fiscally responsible.
I think part of, and I actually know, in part of our park standards and that we came up with is that universal design is not possible in every space. So we cannot, well, like River Ridge, for example, is not a park that can be built or designed or made, changes made without huge costs to make that universally, to meet those universal design standards. So in that space, would we recommend creating more accessibility? Or doing that? No. We might look at things about how we could reduce barriers. For instance, not everybody has walking challenges. They might have visual challenges. So what can we do to increase accessibility within that space to make it more usable for other users? We can look at other parks and say, this space, and you also have to think about what's the experience. Why are people going to a park? So Hurdles Beach, are we going to be able to get people onto the beach? Probably not. That there is a lot of wave action there. If we were to put Moby mats or build ramps, they're just going to get washed away and destroyed. So is that a good use of taxpayer dollars that we would recommend? No. But what we could do is create or build spaces to get people as close as they can to the water so that they can experience that. They can see it, they can hear it, they can feel the sand or the wind on their face that's coming off the water so that we can reduce the barriers. Right now, people with disabilities are not going to be accessing our spaces because they can't. They can't get there. They don't know what is there. We haven't done great jobs of informing people of what features are in the spaces or what we can do, what we've done to reduce barriers. So we have a lot of work to do on that. But at the same time, we're then being exclusive. We're not being inclusive or we're not doing things to reduce barriers, where we really think as a municipality, it's important to think of everybody within the municipality and what little pieces can we do where to provide more accessibility to folks.
Okay. So I think the answer was no. But thank you for all that input. And that'll be part of what our discussion will be is, can we identify where we want to invest the resources that are going to be the best investment we can make? And that's, I think, for us to really consider. Now I've lost track of who's next. Councillor Bell. Councillor DeLong, and then Councillor Bell.
Thank you. I really like your accessibility answers. Could I look at the Hurdles Beach slide again? So in the low, medium costs, we've got delineated parking, and in the high costs, we've got paved parking. What's the delineation method when we don't have a paved surface? Do we have one? Because I think that was something we discussed previously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a couple of different things you can do. They're certainly not as effective as, pavement with lines. But you can put concrete bumper curbs like you would see in a paved parking lot. They do exist in the center of the gravel lot at Hurdles Beach, but you could put those at a spacing to indicate, each one of those as a spot. I know that there is places where they might not have access to the material now in the volume you would need, but old fire hose that's then laid out on the gravel. So it's not perfect, but you can do some things. You could even, pack your surface and spray lines, but again, it comes with maintenance challenges. But there is ways to delineate better than what we have now, which is just the blank gravel lot.
Okay. And may I ask another question?
Can we go to Councillor Bell? Can we go to Councillor Bell first? And Councillor Bell?
Thank you. When we look at the various lists you have here, each one comes with a fair amount of cost. Mm-hmm. I understood that in each one of these, paving is one of the high costs if we do that. But I understood that if you paved a pad within the parking lot for a vehicle with handicap plates or sticker, that is a first step and worth points. Mm-hmm. I would rather see baby steps taken to involve a number of parks if we looked at that. The other thing, I don't think we can do everything, and I don't like doing necessarily a little bit. in each park. I'd like us to pick one area, and that, I don't care which district it's in, but pick one and do that. Do everything that's on the list. And then we say that one is checked off. And then in the following year, maybe we pick another one. I will support doing this work in anyone's district if we're going to do a good job. But if we're going to do piecemeal here and a little bit there, I find it difficult because at the end of 4 years or the end of 10 years, you have a little bit done in every park and no park gets the certification. So if we're really serious about this, let's pick one area and do it right. Thank you.
Okay, back to Councillor DeLong.
Thank you. River Ridge, the access road is, I think we did discuss this previously, but is it too steep for regular folks to just drive their four-door cars up, or is it actually usable if it were to be paved?
It could be done. I mean, you can do a lot, but it comes at a high cost.
Yeah.
So it is a very steep grade. So I think right now, the access road, and I would have to look at the specific notes, but they may indicate that, with that grade and the ongoing maintenance, you might need to pave that. But again, you could, it is steep, but again, it comes at a cost.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Councillor Smith, you look like you have a question.
Oh my goodness, I don't even need to put up my hand anymore. No, just a comment. I really appreciate the work that you've done with these recommendations and the audits. I think about Indian Falls, and I have to admit, it never crossed my mind how that park could be more accessible, because in my use of it, in my family, I see my kids jumping off big rocks, into the water, and I don't. Oh, should I not say that? That was pre me coming on to council, but but seeing how these audits are done and how different people can enjoy those spaces. For example, with Indian Falls is improving pathways to a look-off. I think that's wonderful, and I do really appreciate the work that's been done on making sure that there's more social inclusion in these spaces.
Go ahead.
If I can just follow up a little bit with Councillor Bell stated, that's exactly the approach that we took with River Ridge Common, in that we engaged the public, we had a concept plan, and then we implemented it over 4 or 5 years. And the result is, well, now you see it's one of our regional parks, and I would also say it's on the cusp of a destination park because of the mountain bike trails. So it is a process that has been used in the past and has demonstrated success.
So that's what the conversation today is about the short term and the longer term, which is really looking at how planning can really set out a map for how we're going to develop. And it does involve public input in terms of assessing what the community and the people potentially to use the area could do, and are looking for and want to have, and then setting out a plan. So to your point, Councillor Bell, I think that's what we're going to get to. Councillor Brooks.
Just a quick question. Was chip seal ever investigated for any of these parking possibilities as an alternative to paving? That you could delineate lines on chip seal?
Not specifically referenced, but there would be a whole host of options that you could consider when you look at hard surfacing or upgrading your material for better compaction and usability as a surfacing. So certainly that could be up for discussion.
Okay, let's move on to the next part of this, and yeah.
Yeah, so Kelly, our new active living coordinator, is going to take us through the 2 slides of the active transportation plan. And before she does go over those slides, I just wanted to state that in June of 2024, the consulting firm came in and made a presentation concerning the active transportation plan. At the time, council had given some direction to staff to make some changes to the mission statement and a couple of other things. That plan has been updated to reflect that direction of council. However, at the time, council made the decision to receive the plan and not adopt it. So you might have heard some of the language that we've been using throughout our presentation with the park standards. Council adopted it. With the accessibility plan, the audits, council adopted. So there is an intention, and so we don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the active transportation slides. We wanted to bring it forth because it could impact the capital, or it may impact the capital planning, maybe not this year, but over the 5-year course. We understand that today's focus is on parks, but we wanted to bring the active transportation plan. So just want to give you a bit of a heads up that we will be likely bringing the plan back and seeking an adoption, because as of right now, we don't have the plan on the website because it's a received document, not an adopted document. So with that, I'll hand the floor to Kelly, and we'll discuss the active transportation plan.
Thank you, Trudy. So the updated active transportation plan was updated and prepared in June of 2024 by Urban Systems Limited. This plan was developed over a 10-month timeframe based on consultation with community members, stakeholders, and municipal staff. This updated plan was to update the June 2011 plan. So there is plans that we will be bringing this back to council. So today is just simply a high-level overview, just to have this on council's radar for the next 5 years. The plan proposes recommended priority projects categorized in 3 phases: the short-term, medium, and long-term. These were identified as part of the public and stakeholder engagement process, which was then assessed for feasibility, community benefit, network integration, and community demand. So the chart that's shown on the slide indicates the short-term projects within the next 1 to 2 years. The areas listed include Cookville, LaHave River Trail, and the Mark Connector. You will notice that the recommendations provide a high-level cost estimate on the capital cost for each project listed. This is meant for planning purposes. The estimated short-term total cost for the 3 locations is $6.3 million to $9.9 million. I do want to reiterate that we anticipate bringing this plan back to council, so this is just a very high level at this current time. The second chart, as shown on the slide, indicates the medium-term projects, which is for the next 2 to 5 years. The areas listed include New Germany, LaHave Route 331, and Blockhouse. The estimated total cost for these 3 locations are $4.9 million to $7.9 million. So again, a very high level, but we just wanted to give you this on your radar for the next 5 years, and we would be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Councillor Oikle.
It's not so much a question as it is a comment about when this plan was brought to the public. I attended as many of the sessions as possible. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, Wildville was not part of those sessions, and very few people from Wildville attended. In fact, as far as I know, nobody other than myself. And I did talk to the facilitators, and I mentioned about active transportation between Victoria Ridge and the town of Bridgewater. And I just wanted to bring that up into council's ears, because it isn't part of the plan, but as was talked by one of our residents at council this week, that there is a high need for active, safe transportation between Victoria Ridge and Bridgewater. And I just wanted to remind and to bring that up. Thank you.
Other questions from councillors? I just have, because I'm just trying to understand how this fits into, like, these numbers are staggering to me. They give me a chill. As much as we want to do these things, the cost is like incredible. And these are estimates, I know, but if you think out a few years, like, they're going to, just add 15 to 20% a year, like, it's mind-boggling. And I would like some comment as to how this fits in with, and how staff see this fitting in with investment in our parks, because this is another whole bucket of money, and how that fits with the bucket of money we need for parks and recreation. I know these are these have been tabled, but I'd like some comment on how you see that all fitting together.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And then we know that the discussion is around parks, but we didn't want to not bring the active transportation because it is something that council has been investing in. For example, we did the paved shoulders in Martins River to Mahone Bay. There was $870,000 that council made the decision to invest to make that a safer route. I would say in our world, I've been in this business for 34 years, we always try to find other partners and other funding. So you're right, they are big ticket items, and I think it involves setting priorities. Which one is the number one? Maybe you choose one out of for the next 4 years and try to figure out what those partners are that's going to bring money to the table that enables you to do that within the capital projects that we have. What we are seeing, is people do need safe connections. In the plan, the consultant recognized that we have a robust trail system, and so a lot of that was making connections to that spine and doing the multi-use pathways. It's not surprising that, or it's not surprising to me that Pine Grove and the number 10 area came up as an active transportation, because we are a developing community. We're going to be probably seeing an increase of like 1,500 residents. I know myself, my husband and I walked that route one Saturday. I don't know if I want to walk it again. When I started at the exit, when you get off exit 12 and I walked to the Walmart, I see a number of people walking to work from an employment perspective. So I do see it beyond the realm of recreation. It just happens to fall within our department. I think there's economic development impacts. There's people are facing housing challenges, and so if they can live closer to where they work and they have safer connections. So I think it does go beyond the conversation of just recreation. It just happened to be us that developed the plan, and so I think we have to look at the bigger picture and where does this fit in our development patterns and our planning patterns when we're thinking about public transportation for busing, but there's also active transportation. And how can we use some of those linkages that makes the most sense and might be more cost effective?
Thank you for that clarification, and I just, as a personal comment, I'd really rather see this be a cross-departmental consideration, and I appreciate that you've suggested that, and I think for our purposes, it needs to come out of, I'm afraid it might get lost if we just leave it in recreation, and that it needs to be something that's broadly considered across departments, and that would be just a comment I would make. Are there other comments? Because what I'd like us to do is take Councillor Bell.
If I can just enhance what you had mentioned, I believe AT investment removes park investment monies when you lump the two of them together. If I have to make a choice, I'm going to always go to parks. Paved shoulders are really favorable to taxpayers, even though I haven't had them done in my area. In those areas that they were done, people were asking me, well, why don't you have it here? So they actually feel that it does provide for safer walking, for pedestrians, for cyclists, etc. But when we were discussing an AT route from town of Bridgewater Line to Staples, even with 70% funding, it was very negative, and I think it was 19 million. Anyway, I heard that well and clear, even though I thought it was a good idea, and I had walked the area myself. I had taken pictures while I walked, just to emphasize where an investment like that might be considered. But after hearing from my constituents who don't even live in the area, I heard it loud and clear that that's too much money to put in such a short distance. So it might be better spent in public transit or something else that offers a safe route. That's all I want to mention.
Other comments? Okay, I think what we'll do is take a 5-minute break, and because what's going to come back next are the short-term recommendations, things that we need to think about for direction to staff to bring back in our operating budget for this year. So we'll take a 5-minute break. All right, we'll resume our discussion, and now, at this point, I think you'll bring forward some recommendations for this year's budget, and then we'll focus on that, and then perhaps go following that to the larger discussion that Councillor Bell started to get into a little bit in terms of looking at priorities for how we view going forward over the next number of years. So I'll turn it back to you, Ms. Payne, to take us through this year's recommendations.
Yeah, okay, and if I could first, I would like to just focus a little bit on some of the projects that was completed in between 23 and 2025, and that was when the council set the priority of Recreate Parks. And I'll just go through these very quickly, just to give you a sense of what has been accomplished and how it does tie into the park standards. And then I will get into the recommendations that staff are bringing forward for council's consideration for the upcoming budget and more long-term. So some of the capital projects that were completed through the Recreate Parks was our Mark Playground that was completed last year. So anything that you see a check mark by, it means we have completed it. Any that has an asterisk means we're still in the process and maybe some decisions still needs to be made around that. So we did park trail development in Indian Falls. So I don't know if anybody has been at Indian Falls, but there's a beautiful accessible trail that leads down to the river. There's additional park furnishings. So it's been a great addition to Indian Falls, so I encourage you to go there. We have done furnishing installation with park benches, picnic tables, and waste receptacles in a number of our parks, and we are still going to need to continue to do that. One of the things that came out of the park standards, particularly with the furnishings and the wayfinding, is that we want, when somebody walks into one of our parks, we want them to be able to identify that it's a municipality of the District of Lunenburg Park. So that's why the consistency with the picnic tables, the benches, and our waste receptacles, and our wayfinding, just so that it is very, very distinct that you know that you're in MODL parks. And then we had some Mark Trail and Arthur Young Trail upgrades as part of that capital project. We had our park accessibility audits done, which you've just heard about, our active transportation plan updated, and that's why it's received, not accepted. We had our Saw Pit Wharf park and concept and implementation plan done, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we get into our other projects. And we installed a MobiMat at Mushmush Park, which is a picture there as well. Just a little bit, just to digress a little bit, when Marta was saying, you know, about Hurdles Beach and the MobiMat, we had originally thought about a MobiMat for Hurdles Beach, but we decided not to do that for the various reasons. And so, to her point, sometimes you can make things more accessible, and sometimes you can't due to the environment, and that's always the lens that we look through. The other capital projects is we have an e-bike loan program that we are looking at launching. We receive funding through Connect 2 and through the Community Culture and Heritage and some small investment from the municipality to purchase e-bikes, and we're working with the Lunenburg County Lifestyle Center and the South Shore Regional Library to basically get those out like a book. If you want to borrow, it could be somebody that's facing some transportation challenges or somebody that's looking to buy an e-bike but not sure if they want to invest. So it's really trying to get that a different way of thinking besides vehicle out there. And I know that an RFQ is soon going to be we're soon going to be taking the RFQ out there, and now that we have our active living position filled again. TISI was very successful in getting funding in purchasing 6 Parasport wheelchairs and a trailer. So the picture that you see on the slide is a wheelchair basketball that we did in partnership with the town of Lunenburg, and so now we're able to expand our Parasport opportunities with these wheelchairs and the trailer. We have the vault toilet design and change rooms for Mushmush. So that the designs have all been completed. And in fact, they've been done in a way, and Stephen can correct me if I'm wrong, that if we wanted to do a vault toilet in another park, we have the plan now in place. It can be duplicated. The reason why there's an asterisk there is the design has been done, but we have not put the tender out. And we've purposely not put the tender out at this point in time because we knew we were coming to this session and talking about priorities and moving forward. So we just want to get direction from council around that particular project. Park gates, we had the intention of installing like a bollard system, I guess, or is that correct? And each one of our parks that don't have gates, and so that we can put a chain across. It's not to make them have gates full time, what we discovered through COVID and through some of our storms that we've been having is the need to close parks, and when it's very difficult to close them to the public when there isn't a gate system. So we are in the process of finalizing that, and we've made that part of our wayfinding contract. And then we also had problems with our grub infestation at the Mark Ball Field. I know engineering worked very diligently with a company. We've got that now under control, and they're going to continue that. But that did impact our ball fields where we had them closed for one season, for most of one season. So it did impact people going to other areas, and the users appreciated it when the ball fields were reopened. We partnered with MICA and purchased public moorings. So there are islands that MICA owns, and so they have installed public moorings. So if you're going out as a boater, you have the ability to use a public mooring, trying to get to downsize on the private moorings that often show up in front of islands. Wayfinding, so our park gates, our beacons, our kiosks, our directional, so we have got that contracted out. We were hoping to have it done by December, hoping by March, but the reality of that, when you get your capital upgrade, is we likely have to do some carryover to get that finished before the parks open. Arts on the trail and in parks. So last year, we added a piece to the LaHave Sunset Park, which is the pencil walk. We didn't do an art on the trail this year because our active living coordinator's position was vacant, but this is something that we have traditionally put some funding in our capital and look at a park or a trail to incorporate some type of art, to add some distinct features and another reason for somebody to come visit the trail or visit the park. The Osprey Trail Connector we completed, which is, if you just look out, well, I guess you can't look out the window, but this was a significant connector point with some of our trail systems to enable folks on bikes, walking, or ATVs to get from one point to the other. So it was a significant piece that was missing in that trail system. And Indian Falls stairs design and installation was completed, so our stairs at Indian Falls was deemed to be unsafe. The picture that you see, if you haven't went to Indian Falls, these are the new stairs that have been installed. We conduct wharf assessments on Sawpit Wharf and Rose Bay once every 3 years. So again, this is something that our insurance company has indicated we should be doing, and so this is something that we usually budget for, so I'm just putting that out there. We had completed pickleball court designs for both Osprey and Center. Again, I won't go into that because we had the big discussion on Tuesday. And we've had done some park upgrades around Mosh, Indian Falls, and Wiles Lake. We did paved shoulders at Martins River to Mahone Bay. This was in partnership with Public Works. That's what I was referring to before, around the $870,000 that was spent on paved shoulders. And we did the design work for the AT connector at Highway 10. Council made the decision to remove that from the capital budget, but the design work has been completed. And then the picture that you see in front of you are the stairs and handrails that was incorporated at the Oakland Conservation Area. This was a request from MICA, who has the stewardship agreement, and they requested this, and there was also some brush clearing for visibility at that particular conservation area. So those, I just want to give you a bit of a sense of what's been accomplished in the 2 years and what we're still working on as a result of the Recreate Parks priority that was set by the previous council, and as a result of our park standards document and the feedback that we received in our 2023 park survey. So are there any questions around any of that before I get into the recommendation?
Councillor Vino and then Councillor DeLong.
Thank you. Because this came up in your slide deck just now, I was wondering if you could speak to the Sawpit Wharf concept and implementation plan that we had conducted in the previous term, just to bring up to speed to new councillors what happened with that.
So you want me to describe the process, or?
Yeah, and just the outcome that, and how well that was received by the community.
Yes, we do have a Sawpit Wharf Advisory Committee, which is made up of community reps, and I, as the staff person, I'm the resource person on that committee. That was established in 2012, and we're going back in my memory, the advisory committee. And one of, in their terms of reference, is developing a community plan. So There had been some upgrades to the park during that term, like the floating wharf was an addition that was made. The upper parking lot was created. But the committee really wanted to get community input and develop a community plan to try to improve some of the amenities and the use of the park. So council did allocate in their capital budget funding to hire a consulting firm to do the public consultation and to develop that concept and implementation plan. We hired a firm, Matthew Wright from I can't remember, Mills and Wright, thank you. His first name is Matthew, so I'm not completely off. Mills and Wright, a firm from Newfoundland who did, I think, a superb job at the public consultation. We did a public open house in Lunenburg, and we had great attendance from council and from community members. We also had an online survey, and we had a number of stakeholder engagements where he went and met with, like, DNR, who is also part of owns some of the property around Saw Pit Wharf, to the people that have boathouses around Saw Pit Wharf, to the seniors group that often comes and uses Saw Pit Wharf for picnicking. So it was a quite robust, is what my point is, engagement. So it was some clear direction of what people want to see in the park, and so that's really the reflection of the concept plan. Matthew brought the concept plan, council gave some feedback, there was some tweaks. The committee also gave their feedback, and there were some tweaks, and as a result, we have what we feel is a very good concept plan that can be implemented over a 1 to 4 year period if council wants to go in that direction. But this is the feedback that came from the community, and the concept reflects that. So is there anything more you want me to add to that? Okay.
Thank you. Just so in a similar vein, for any new counselors or anybody listening online, could you describe the partnership with MICA and what the acronym stands for?
Oh, yes. So MICA, sorry, I get caught up in the acronyms, is the Mahone Island Conservation Association. They are a nonprofit organization that is really about conserving islands in the Mahone Bay area. One of the things that was identified some time ago was that we really didn't have ocean access from the land for people in that area. There's really no parks in that district. So MICA had identified this piece of property, came forth and asked the municipality to be a partner. The land was purchased with funds that the Mahone Bay Island Conservation Association raised, as well as some taxpayers' dollars to purchase that piece of property. We entered into a stewardship agreement for them to steward that piece of property. You'll note that I call it a conservation area. It is definitely not a park. They definitely want to call it a conservation area. They're trying to leave it as natural as possible, recognizing that people want access to the beach. That is why our parks crew really only cuts the grass like in April, and then they might go cut the grass again in September. The reason why the stairs, they had identified that there was a number of people with some that had brought forth that they were having challenges to get to the beach, recognizing that, again, this is where you do some of the compromises when you're working with the environment that you have. It was determined that, and again, engineering can correct me if I'm wrong, it would be a bit more of a challenge to do the slope and the ramp. And MICA agreed with the stairs and the handrail so that people with mobility issues would have a little easier time getting down using the handrail so they could access the beach. So that's really, and we really do try to listen and take direction from the Mahone Island Conservation Area because they're the stewards of the property. So anything we do, we engage, and we talk to each other all the time. You're welcome.
Are there questions? Okay.
Okay, so the next is where I know that everybody's wanting to go. But I gave everybody that background information. So the capital project recommendations that staff are putting forth today for council to consider in their 25-26 budget. Now, I do want to state that there are no dollar figures, and that was intentional. That will come when it comes through the budget process. So when we get direction, we'll go back, bring that plan and bring it forth as part of the budget discussion. So this is really not to get bogged down in those numbers, just where you want your priorities and your directions to be. So these are not in any particular order, I will say that. So the first one that we have as a recommendation is to reimagine the Mark and Wiles Lake Park and do an extensive public consultation process that will lead us to an implementation plan for the Mark and Wiles Lake. And the reason why we're bringing forth this recommendation, and I'm going back to the park standards document, where we have 3 regional parks identified. They were the Mark, Wiles Lake, and River Ridge. River Ridge really, unless we want to make extend amenities, is really at a stage of maintaining. We've already went through the community consultation, we've went through the concept plan, and we did the implementation. As I had stated before, the Mark, in my estimation, I know when I first moved to this area, even though I didn't live in this area, everybody knew where the Mark was. It was the icon park, really, in our park system. We have outdoor space, and during COVID, all parks were closed, of course. But after COVID, the municipality made a decision based on some safety concerns not to open the buildings at the Mark. So I think we are probably seeing decreased use because of that. It is a regional park. It is a signature park. It has been identified in our 5-year capital plan. I think it was scheduled in our 5-year capital plan for next year. Staff are recommending where it's a regional park and identified as a regional park that we should really be looking at bringing those 2 parks to the standard of a regional of our regional standard. So that's the rationale why this is being recommended to be considered. Miller Point Peace Park, again, I think was the number 2 in our park surveys as the favorite place, and it is really one of our, even though we closed the gate, it really truly is one of our year-round facilities that gets used. The accessible trail to connect from the outer to the inner parking lot is part of the plan that we're recommending. We have applied for funding, just so that council is aware. Now, if council, this is not the direction council wants to take, and we are successful in getting that funding, we can always say we're not moving forward with that. But it was one of the highest things that was pointed out in the survey, to when Marta was describing that if you've ever went to Miller Point Peace Park, you park in the outer parking lot and you walk in, you are sharing that roadway with vehicles that might be going into the inner parking lot. So there's kind of an unofficial trail that's been established by people walking, and so that's what we're recommending, that we make accessible, leads to the inner parking lot, which would lead you to the accessible picnic table that has shade, to the washrooms. And if council looked at the accessible canoe kayak launch, that's where that would be as well. We're looking at the inner parking lot. There's a natural spot for there that was identified in the accessibility audit that was presented by Maria. And then looking at upgrading a current trail to make it more accessible for users, but also for one of our service people that go in to pump the vaults. So that's one of the other recommendations. And Indian Falls, this we consider some low-hanging fruit when it comes to Indian Falls, and I don't know where I have on this presentation. There's some parks that I feel that, in our opinion, that you need to do further consultation, especially if you're making significant changes, and there's some that you're making upgrades that really wouldn't involve that level of consultation that other ones would. And that Miller Point would be one, because really what came out of that park survey is just upgrading some of the amenities that we have. And Indian Falls, we have spent a little bit of money over the last couple of years at Indian Falls with the stairs and making some accessible trails, making more access to the river. We would see this as perhaps the last phase of making the picnic area. And again, anybody that's familiar with Indian Falls, you drive in, you see that nice grassy space, you have the viewing area. So making that picnic area and the viewing area more accessible with some picnic benches, maybe some shaded areas. And and also recommending that we include an accessible vault washroom. Right now, we put porta potties in and we take them out during the season. So this would, I guess, very much like River Ridge, this would put this park at a maintenance stage. And then, of course, we're recommending the internal park wayfinding strategy. This was definitely something that came out in the park surveys. People really appreciated the wayfinding that we have done, like that says, here you are, in our park rules. But, you know, like, for example, Miller Point, there's a lot of pathways that you can go to. And so there's really not any internal wayfinding to say that. And so we're suggesting that we invest in an internal wayfinding strategy that marries with the current wayfinding that we have. And then park by park, we would look at making sure that that signage is installed at the appropriate stop points and directional points. The marked ball fields. So we do have the ball fields with the grub issue hopefully well under control, and we do have a lot of usage of our ball fields. They're used quite a bit. We're suggesting that we put fencing around the ball fields so to prevent things like off-highway vehicles or other vehicles driving in, to protect that asset, to repair current fencing, and to reinstall 2 dugouts. This year we did install, which I didn't put on the 2023 capital project list, 25, we did install some spectator bleachers to help improve the viewing and the experience of those going to cheer on their relatives or friends while they're playing ball. Again, to begin the implementation of Sawpit Wharf concept plan, and we're proposing year 1B engineering plans, because we have the concept, which is the picture, but you need to have much more details. And then you just plan over the 5-year capital plan, implementing that over that time frame. And the consultant did give us an implementation phase, which he's suggesting 3 phases. So it would take, with the engineering plans, and then implementing those 3 phases could take 4 years. Recommending that the Art on the Trail funding or in the park remain as a consistent over the 5-year capital project. And I put this bullet here is just to, often we do take special requests from our trail groups. In the past, in our operating budget, we have given them some capital funding to basically maintain, upgrade their surfacing, and that's been through what is commonly referred to as the gas tax dollars. But sometimes there's a special project, like they're upgrading a bridge that's costing over $1 million, and they've leveraged dollars from the province, and they're coming and asking us for the final $30,000 so that they can get that $1 million project completed. So I just plant that seed that I know that there's some special requests that are coming from trail groups, so just putting that in the preview of the 25-26 capital budget. And then the next slides are really just, so that's the recommendation coming from staff for this upcoming year. And then these are just some broad projects for council to consider over that 5-year capital plan, which is pickleball courts, which we had conversations with on Tuesday, and depending on what direction that goes. Active transportation infrastructure, hence why the 2 slides, just to plant the seed. And then we're recommending that if any major upgrades happens to Hurdles Beach, the Mark, Wiles Lake, Mush Mush, and Pine Grove, we feel that these are the parks that would need public consultation. So I'll go to Mush, because that's the one that's fresh in my mind. You know, if you look at the accessibility report, there was quite a few changes on that conceptual plan for Mush. So I guess to go back to Councillor Bell's point, do we want to invest in a park, plan for it, and then start implementing so that we know that we're putting the accessible pathways in the right locations, we're putting the MobiMat, we're putting washrooms, we're putting the playground structure, like, so that it all marries. At one point, we had that big overarching plan, which has worked well with River Ridge, and I would say, even though we haven't implemented Sawpit Wharf, worked well with the Sawpit Wharf doing those plans. And consideration for refresh of our open space strategic plan. It's over 20 years old. And people might say, well, what's the difference between the park standards and the open space strategic plan? The park standards really speaks to the parks that we have in our current system and where we want to bring them, what standard we want to reach. Our open space strategic plan was really about, and I think to give credit to the open space strategic plan, that's probably why some of our parks are currently in the park system that we have today. Somebody was very forward-thinking in those days to say, look, we need to ensure that we have access to lakes, we have access to beaches, or we have park spaces in our municipality. I think I can comfortably say that I think that the municipality of Lunenburg has one of the most extensive park systems compared to other municipalities. I'm very comfortable, and I take no credit for that. That was the thinking of 25 years ago. But it is outdated. We have done a number of the things in that open space strategic plan, so is it time to go and ask the public? And basically, I think the question that was asked at the time when I spoke to the former rec director is like, what gyms are there in the municipality of Lunenburg that you used to have access to and don't have access to now that you would like to see the municipality invest in? And the one example that comes to mind is Firebrook Falls was identified in the open space strategic plan. It was privately owned. The private owners came to the municipality. They were going to sell it, wanting to sell it, and the municipality invested in that. Even though we haven't done anything with it, it is still within that open space catalog, for lack of a better word, that it's there if we want to develop it or there to leave as a space, but it's there for public. It's part of the futuristic thinking, whereas not that the park standards isn't futuristic, but it's about what we have today and maintaining, whereas the open space is more that visionary and where we could go. And then, of course, again, I repeat, the art on the trail and the park to be considered over the 5-year capital plan. And I'll just finish these last 2 slides if you don't mind. Again, I just included these 2 slides because I wanted to reiterate that we do have current management agreements and stewardship agreements with, and I won't read all of the folks on there, but we do, for the most part, give annual contributions, which is in our operating budget. We provide and we help pay some of the insurance on some of these parks because there was a recognition that they do contribute to our overall park system, and the contributions that we give to these volunteer organizations, in my opinion, are much smaller if we were maintaining them ourselves. So just to remember when you're going through all of this, this is some of the groups that maintain some of our land as a park or as a trail, such as the Mountain Bike Association. And then we also provide annual contributions to our Rails to Trail organizations. And now it's open for questions, and then I think the fun begins around providing us the direction and giving us our orders to how to bring back a 25-26 capital budget.
Okay, so we're focused on the next year, just so we keep our conversations in a bucket. And Councillor Moore is on first, and then Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. On our last Tuesday session, we discussed the pickleball courts. At that time, the quote, I guess I could call it, was not relayed to you. Have you got any update for us on that?
Yes, I do. It just got sent to me yesterday. I was planning on bringing that back as part of the discussion on Monday or on Tuesday.
Okay, I can wait till Tuesday.
I think it would be better, not that I want to defer it, but I think it is it ties in with something we've already set out for our council discussion with that. And, yeah, I think I'd rather see that. So Councillor Brooks and then Councillor Hoopley.
Can you tell me the reasons why the Mark was closed? I know I'm a little new to that, but I understand there were 2, but can you tell me the primary reason that the Mark was closed?
I might need engineering's help a little bit with this, but I know that there was some safety concerns that was identified, and there was costs associated with bringing those safety concerns to meet code, and council made the decision at the time not to keep it closed because of those safety concerns.
Were any of those concerns about accessibility?
Yeah.
I think I'll
Mr.
ask-
Pace, could you?
Yeah. Oh, perfect. He just snuck up there. I didn't.
Yes, and not accessibility, it was more building code issues and fire and life safety. And it's just been closed to the public as well, not, we have limited staff usage of both of those buildings as well, but there was, our building inspectors and fire inspectors have deemed that the occupancy, building code limitations and risk fire and safety, not accessibility.
I'm just going to ask counselors to limit to one question. We'll come back around, but just so that everybody gets a chance to have a full discussion. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hubley and then Oikle.
Is this the time we can discuss something that I think is missing?
I think this is the time, and again, I reiterate that we came with the park standards document forefront in mind, and that's the question of whether council wants to continue in that direction of investing in what's currently in our park system.
So I have an open space strategic plan from 2010. That's 15 years ago. On page 8 of that, it ranks Maliga Lake Park as number 11. Page 14, the action is to build a boat launch. I asked to have this looked at last session, and I don't think we had the resources to look. But I would like to see this on here. That park is not meeting the needs of the residents. There isn't any boat access. The public boat launch was not public. It was private, and it's been closed. It is a destination for bass masters. They have offered to help. I know they haven't come forward. They're going to. I would like to see this added. It is a gem in the municipality that we no longer have access to. There's not one access point in Lunenburg County to that lake. And the Bassmasters and their tournaments and just recreational boating, and I would like to see that added there.
Again, I take direction from council. One of the directions that was provided was for us to go back and take a look at land that was publicly owned in Lunenburg and Queens County. So I do have a map, and I do know what lands, and I'm doing further investigation of like what's the suitability of it, and I will bring that back. But again, because that was a direction of council,
Yeah,
where
that's
this
fair.
lands in the priorities is the discussion that has to happen at this table, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Thank you. 15 years is too long to wait for a boat launch. Thank you.
Councillor Oikle and then Vino.
So I just wanted to add on to, for Councillor Brooks, that the closing of the mark was just the buildings, not the property.
Yes, I should have clarified that, sorry.
Councillor Vino.
Before I ask my one question, to Councillor Hubley's point, if you look at the map we were provided, there's very little in that part of the district. So I think we have to, we all want stuff in our district, but it's also up to us to look at that lens and say, where are we missing some things? So I would support getting that conversation going, knowing that's something that your residents want. I also like Councillor Bell's idea of doing something and getting it done, and whether that's Saw Pit Wharf or Hurdles Beach, Saw Pit Wharf. It'd be nice to, at the end of 4 years, say, this was a completion, and still work on some of the other low-hanging fruit in the other districts. But I'm definitely going to put my voice in for Saw Pit Wharf. It was a community-driven project. The consultation process was great. I'm also in favor of the Wiles Lake consultation process going, the mark going. People are waiting for these. Let's get some of this done. So those are the 4 things I wanted to speak to.
Other question, I think you've brought up is and I think Councillor Bell referred to it as well, is the idea that we get a plan and then follow through with a plan. Because for me, that is a really important direction to give to staff, because, and it also for our residents, because then it sets out to them what seems to be reasonable over a period of time. And to your point, not to be ignoring the other parks, but that you have a focus for a period of time and that you work your way through it. And I think the results, I think River Ridge is a really good example of what good planning and the community involvement, because there was a lot of community support, has now, as you said, it is at a maintenance stage. So I think, you know, the points you're making point to the need for a plan, a consultation, a plan, and then an execution. So, you know, you've highlighted a few of those and to this, at this point. Councillor Smith.
I guess I was going to hold this for after we talked about 25, 26, but since we're talking about the need for plans, I do want to bring up Sherbrooke Lake Park. And it really strikes me that everything that Councillor Vino has listed about Sawpit Wharf could be said about Sherbrooke Lake. And you know, the consultation that was done, the advisory committee that was set up, we even did testing of the lake. You know, we bought the land, we have an MOU with Chester, and then we just seem to really lose momentum on that project. And there's just a lot of frustration about how we are, you know, I look back on years of like, you know, newspaper clippings and statements from mayors, and there's like just such a strong statement of support for that park. And, you know, we have the concept plan, it phases, you know, much like Sawpit Wharf, but somehow it kind of just lost momentum, and now people are wondering, like, where is it in our list of priorities? And I just hope that as we're looking forward at this open space strategic plan, that we're really weighting heavily, like the amount of investment that we have put in to developing a park, the commitment that has been made over the years. And I know that it was a really, you know, it was really complex, and there was a lot of conflict, and but people persevered, and we got to the point that we got to, and I am just really looking forward to seeing to having that discussion about the open space strategic plan and getting that back on the priority list and getting some momentum going again for that park.
Oh, Councillor Brooks.
On auctioneers, which is in my district, I would like this council to revisit. I find it problematic and somewhat indicative of how Riverport has been treated historically, that we had a consultation to come into the community and choose to turn that peach access into conservation land without any consultation with the community. I don't like that policy at all. And so I hope that we can revisit it. I don't know which groups might be, I actually think that there would be a village group that would be happy to undertake some of that maintenance of that. I'm not sure the KCC are the right people to do it. But as it stands, even from a public health perspective, that's a hot, wet bog of water in the summertime, which is a mosquito breeding ground. So if we're concerned about nothing else than the public health issue, we need to look at that as a place where people and family and kids and dogs go. And right at the moment, it's not even remotely up to any sort of snuff. So that's my pitch for that.
Other comments? Could we, because some of these, Councillor Byrne.
I can wait till there's a motion and speak at that point.
Sure, we're going to have a motion. It's
Okay.
more, today it's more
just
that
direction.
we give
Okay.
staff some direction, and then we'll be voting on this through the budget. So
Okay.
if we can kind of, yeah.
Then I will go now. Thank you. I'd like to thank Trudy for including Pine Grove as an upcoming issue. You've certainly heard from me before at the table and individually, and I will be bringing it back. The reason that I don't bring it back with any pointed asks or any requests at this point is just because we've, and this is for anyone listening at home as well, is because we've committed to a public consultation about what the future would be like before we make any decisions. So I just wanted to still be on folks' radar of something that I know the community has been sort of back and forth about and been wanting to be engaged on for a while. So before I, would actually come earnestly to council with any asks on behalf of residents there, I do want to follow through on that consultation process that we committed to, and I just don't want it to sort of fall behind people's thoughts as we talk about this as a whole. And my second thing here really quickly is just like having the perspective of being a younger family here in the municipality, I can say wholeheartedly that the regional parks we have here, they are extremely useful. There's not a problem to travel to them for us. I know for some that it would be more difficult, and we're kind of lucky that way. But a lot of families and a lot of folks are traveling to these parks and utilizing them. So I do think that it is a great thing that we are making some major investments in these larger regional parks. River Ridge is fantastic, and I know that it has recently gotten some of the love dollar-wise. So like being able to invest in Wells Lake and the Mark, I think as a whole municipality, as we take off our local councillor hats and put on our whole regional municipality hats here, I do think investing in those regional parks is just a fantastic idea.
Councillor Oikle.
Thank you very much. And, sorry.
Councillor Vino first, and then Councillor Oikle. No?
Did I might have, maybe I said it in my head, but to Councillor Brooks' point, I would hope that your residents don't feel they've been left off the map because your district specifically has more parks than any other district. There's definitely been funds down there. Your comment about Oxnard's being, a warm mosquito-based place, what would you like to see there? If it's not an ideal place to go because of that?
It's a little small bit of engineering, actually, in a boardwalk that would traverse that. It's not a big deal. I think the issue is more that it's adjacent to a marshland, and so it's sensitive. And for that reason alone, I think people have wanted to stay very, very far away from it. I think there are very simple and low-cost engineering solutions to make that feasible for people. I just think we need to look at it.
Councillor Oikle.
Thank you. I'm really glad to see that you put Wells Lake on there. I'm so glad, and I'm sure councillors from the past are very excited about it too, if they'd known about it, because I know this has been brought up many, many, many times. So I'd be really excited about something like that happening, and especially also with the Mark, because the Mark is so centralized and we've used it so much, and we do need more space for activities and for, because so many community groups have used to access that building. And with the Wells Lake Park just being off of exit 13, easy access as you're driving along, just pop in for a little swim in the lake, have a little picnic. I want to talk also about, if I may, about the art on the trail. And I would really like us to continue to do more interactive art, which is similar to what the pencil walk is, right? You can play on it, you can sit on it, rather than just art that you can look at, which would have been the wonderful installations that were put on the Bay to Bay Trail, right? They were more to look at, right? Also, could we also consider exercise equipment in the parks, especially Miller Peace Park? It's I've brought it up a couple of times over my previous term. It's special equipment that is cemented in, and because we have a lot of families that use that park and a lot of seniors that use that park, to help encourage more active living, right? To be able to interact. And some of it looks kind of artsy too, right? So just to be, kind of consider that as well. Thank you.
Councillor Brooks.
Just to be a contrarian on that point and to have my name on the opposite point of that, I'm opposed to art in the woods. I grew up in Victoria Park in Truro, which is one of the most beautiful parks in the province. And we walked through trails, and the art we looked at was trees and flowers and birds and bugs. And so the idea of our council spending money on a subjective thing such as art, which is lovely to you and different to someone else, at the very least, maybe soliciting artists from the community who do it, and we are not the one who are picking up the cost of it. But, you know, the more and more things that we put into parks, at some point diminish the park. Okay, so we've got lots of different things. You could drop me in Victoria Park and I would know exactly where I was because I've walked in it and used it. And so as everyone else could know where they were before signs were put in. So, you know, this is something that we do as government. We build something and then we decide we'll add a little bit more, and then we'll add a little bit more, and maybe we'll add a little bit more. But before we keep adding a bit more, I'm in favor of Councillor Bell. Let's maintain what we've got. Let's take care of what we've got, and let's be really careful about all of the additional things that we add into the park. We've got the lifestyle center where there's a gym. We've got gyms in the community that are gyms. So I just want us to be really careful about what we start turning our parks into.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I just can't let that pass, the expression about art in our parks. I strongly support art in our parks, and furthermore, I would love to see us explore an arts and culture policy so that we are actually stating the value of art in our communities and in our public spaces, and how we take care of that public art, how we choose it, how we decommission it, how we recognize artists in our communities and what they contribute. And I just fundamentally disagree that art does not contribute to our enjoyment of natural spaces. But I can tell that might be a debate that continues.
So on your last point, I think that's a little off on the arts policy, and it might be appropriate you bring it up at another time, because we're trying to focus, and I understand what you've done, but there is another avenue you can bring that up. The discussion, like the decisions will come when we get down to budget, to your point, Councillor Brooks, about specific investments that we make. But today, it is good that we put our opinions out there, and we encourage that. That's what today is about. And because we want council to be really engaged in the philosophy of what is part of what we do. And these are, in some ways, philosophical discussions, as well as the tactics of how we develop and implement these things get reflected in our budget. So we're at a high level today, and that's good. We need those positions out there. I'm not. Are there other comments you want to make? Okay, Councillor Moore.
Thank you. And as for Allison's issue of bringing up Sherbrooke Lake, a couple of us sat through many years of it, and I understand that her phone is ringing because she is the new council of the area, and she's going to get the phone calls. I have no problem looking at it. We do have the piece of land, even though it's in a different municipality. I have no problem looking at it, but I will not go back and rehash the past. I will not let that be part of moving forward, and it was just too awful. And so if we do at some point, whether it's next year, year after, whatever, do something about Sherbrooke Lake and getting some kind of passive boat launch or something there. As soon as the pass starts coming up, I will be voting no.
Other, Councillor Burns. Oh, sorry. Reinhardt and then Burns.
Thank you. I'm just wondering about the buildings at the Mark. Is it feasible to get those back? Like, I didn't hear much about actual costs, or if that was an option to have that up. Because I remember there used to be so many programs there and activities and things like that.
Stephen's come up, so I'll let him have a kick at the can first.
Sure, and I do want to just clarify, too, that there was a lot of building code and fire safety issues, but there was a list produced of things that we could do to retrofit those buildings to make them open. And so the building inspectors didn't close the building. Actually, it came to council, and the decision was made that we wouldn't do the investment. So just to clarify that, there was just some, by not doing that, it was just limited use for staff only at certain times of the year even, around the safety issues. But the decision was made not to put a lot more money into those buildings without coming up with a plan.
But conceivably, in a reimagining the park, the Mark, it could be a consideration. Does there need to be a facility on site that could accommodate programming? Am I correct?
Yes.
If that's what, if we have a consultation with the public and they come to us and say that, that could be part of what's added.
It's sort of, lacked a functional program, which should be program-driven by recreation through community consultation, and then we can adjust the building accordingly. We may decide the building should be a different configuration, bigger, smaller, no building, depending on what the reimagining comes up with. So I think that rather than pouring more money into it for an interim solution, the decision was made at the time, let's not do that, let's reimagine the Mark and redevelop it appropriately.
Trudy, did you want to?
No, that's pretty much what Stephen said.
Councillor, who was next? Burns and Bell.
Thank you. I also want to thank you for including the bit about trails and having the little bit of extra as groups are going out and getting other funding. We were helping them. I heard an awful lot about that during the campaign, and since the campaign, I still continue to hear an awful lot about trails, and most of it is geared towards how to make them more positive for everyone who either uses them or lives alongside them. So the only point that I would add is I know a lot of times the funding is geared towards connectivity and safety at crossings and whatnot, but if there is anything that comes up with regards to maybe like sound dampening, if there's like someone looking for extra funds to help with that, to either put like dirt walls or trees or whatever it is that people do for sound. You can imagine going up the 10 there. I have a lot of residents that the trail is fairly close to their home along there. So that was more of just a bug. I'm glad that it's in there. Thank you. And then if anything comes up for requests for that, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Councillor Bell?
Thank you. Being part of the conversations when we looked at the Mark, and at the time, I understood that renovations to bring the present buildings there up to code was very costly. It might even be weighed upon building new as opposed to doing the renovations, or to take an older building and put in what needed to be, make it more safe, make it up to the code. So at the same time, we were looking at possible community space or community meeting room phased in or incorporated with what could be some type of market building across the street here. And that would be probably community meeting space that could be available to look after the groups that went to the Mark before. And I even think that part of the discussion was for if you're doing square dancing or whatever, is it any more difficult to come to Nathan Sorella Road as it is to go to Dayspring? And at the time, the answer was, well, as long as we have some space to use, that's reasonable costs, we can probably go anywhere within the near geographical area. So because we were only talking about a plan and a concept, we didn't make the investment down there until we knew what we were doing here. So I think that that's part of the discussion, but not the discussion today. But I wanted Councillor Reinhardt to understand that it wasn't dropped, it wasn't forgotten, and give a reason why renovations weren't made. And if, Steve, if you can add anything to that, but that's how I interpreted it.
And I think the bottom line is it really, we really question what the function of the building was. Like it's sort of gone along through history and evolved, but really what is the purpose of it and how are we going to make it over? And there's even talk at that time about not having any building, but maybe outside structures to support the outside kind of space. Like it's just so up in the air without a consultation process. We didn't want to waste any money trying to make it usable.
And the one point I would like to add about the Mark, and I think it's a little bit special compared to some other parks because you do have the indoor and the outdoor space. And yes, community groups do come and rent it, but from our own programming perspective, I know that our programmer valued the fact that we had an indoor and an outdoor space. So like if we're doing like the Easter egg hunt, which sometimes April is not the warmest time of year in Nova Scotia, having that indoor space where families could go in and do crafts, get warm, or use the washroom, but still have the ability to go outside. Like most parks don't have that extra feature of having those community spaces. And I can't speak on behalf of the community. I suspect that might be something that comes up in the Mark reimagining, but from our perspective as staff offering programs, there's definitely a benefit, and having that as a regional space and having the baseball fields there, the playground, the trails, just the grass space, having the kitchen space to be able to prepare snacks when you've got, 20 preschoolers that's come for a program at the Mark. There was definitely and I think that's the reason why the Mark was used a lot in the past. We used to have Girl Guides and Boy Scouts and different groups come in and use the administration building when we used to have bunks, so we don't have that anymore. But it was really used as that space of indoor, the benefit of having that indoor, but the value of having that expansive outdoor space too, to really just play and explore and to be able to do many things. So I just felt like I needed to say that there is definitely value, and I know that the reasons discussed at council of not to reopen it, part of the reason why staff is recommending that the reimagining of the Mark get moved up in the 5-year capital plan, because it is really a regional park, and it has been since I think it was established in the 80s.
Councillor Brooks.
Do we have any sort of numbers on what that even retrofitting or just getting things up to current code was looking at? Do we have any numbers for that?
I don't recall. It's a few years ago. I don't recall.
We did have numbers. What I would say is if, with the direction of council, based on the changes that is happening in our world and the cost, I would think that we would need to get that recosted and bring it back. But we would still have the list of the deficiencies.
To Trudy's point, one of the things that I think is neat about the Mark is it kind of straddles parks and infrastructure a little bit. In my district, there are a number of places and opportunities for people in the southern part of District 9 to get together and to recreate and whatnot. And I've been concerned about the closure of the Mark because it leaves some gaps for that community there, not just from a recreational point of view, but to have that place. I know there's the Dayspring Fire Hall and there's the Oak Hill Fire Hall and there's the Dayspring small community center there, or the church that's used as dual purpose. But I frankly, for my constituents, will try to advocate for that Mark to get reimagined and reopened and have the inside and outside space. I think it's a real valuable asset, not just for my district and my constituents, but really the location of it is really nice for a lot of people to come to. So I'm certainly in support of that.
I'm hearing a general belief that planning on parks is really important.
I'm happy to.
And I think that's really significant in terms of how we step forward on this. And our conversation over the last half hour is really focused around the idea that, yes, let's take our regional parks, recognizing we've got some other things that we need to look at, but I think there's general alignment here to bring us forward some numbers and the more detailed plans that will go with this based on what you've suggested here. I also think that the conversation has really pointed to the longer-term strategy around planning, and that there are some, that, you know, and I've noted them, there's 4 things that people have specifically mentioned that I think need to either factor in somewhere. Some of them may actually overlap and can go, initial view, like on the Maliga Lake issue, that may be something that can actually fit into this year in terms of looking at what the cost might be and the location and all of that. I don't know that, but the four areas that were brought up that I think aren't reflected necessarily in here, but are maybe longer-term things, might be obviously Sherbrooke Lake, the Maliga Lake boat launch, Oxner Beach, and how that might fit into either reconsidering, reevaluating that. And that may be a conversation we just need to have. I don't know that. And then, of course, what happens out of Pine Grove is a bit unknown, but it is a beginning of a public consultation which comes as a result of the reinvigoration of interest in that area and some of the issues that have come from it not being functional as a park, really, and how we manage through that. So those are the 4 things I noted. I'm not sure, are there, and I'm going to ask, first of all, are there other comments you want to make that would give Trudy direction for this year's plan? And then we'll open it up for some other comments that may relate to the longer-term strategy.
No, just in terms of timing of your projects, I understand council's desire to want to make improvements immediately, but we really appreciate hearing you say that you're interested in planning. And that helps us in several ways. If we're able to do public engagement and design in a separate year than we're doing the construction, that gives us a much better opportunity to plan and prepare so we can do a better job on procurement and planning our work plans for the coming construction year. The other benefit, though, of expanding the timeline, particularly during the planning phase, is that funding cycles, particularly from the largest pots that we normally access, which are infrastructure dollars from our federal and provincial counterparts, they go on annual cycles, and they don't always reflect our construction season or our budget season. So if we're engaging in an approach where when we want to do major projects, they are going to have the larger dollar values, we are going to want to do everything that we can to get tripartite funding on those. And that means spending more time having shovel-ready type designs so that we can go and have confidence in the number and not get ourselves in a situation where we chase dollars based on budgets built in a concept plan that then turns out we didn't have all the consideration for water course or whatever other elements, and then there's new components we have to budget for. So we end up short on whatever the percentage of funding we thought that we were going to get. So switching to the long-term planning approach is very much appreciated.
Well, I think we'll end up with a better product, which is ultimately for the taxpayer what they want and what we want as managers of the resource. So, a couple of comments. Councillor Oikel.
Thank you. Also, I believe to add to your list for consultation is the Mark and Wiles Lake. We've heard that from a variety of councillors this morning. And are we going to be talking about, because consultation does take a year or more, and so in the meantime, are there things that are on our list that we want to consider actually doing and completing, such as in Indian Falls, making the picnic and viewing area accessible, the canoe launch at Miller Peace Park, or the vaulted toilets at Mush. So I'm just, want to put that out there, that the consultation is one thing, but actually completing something, maybe, also.
Yeah, so the capital projects recommendations for 2025-26 would include doing some, like, consulting, but also, like, upgrading, creating the accessible trail at Miller Point, doing those things to Indian Falls, investing in an internal parkway finding strategy. So I guess the direction that I'm looking, maybe I could ask it this way, is there anything on our 25-26 list that you absolutely don't want us to do and don't want us to bring us a budget figure for? Otherwise, if I get the direction, we're going to go back and try to create a capital plan based on this. And then ultimately, you guys will need to make the decision from a priority point, if we can't afford everything, what stays in and what doesn't stay in.
And I'll get to Councillor Brooks. I didn't hear, the lot of focus was on the planning piece and the consultation, and I saw that as clearly to the regional parks, but also that it's an overriding desire for planning, a planning exercise that when we are looking forward, that we try to look at how we're going to prioritize some of these other activities related to the discussion, which included the points I made earlier about Sherbrooke Lake and Maliga and Oxnard Beach and Pine Grove, that those things are probably not necessarily, there may be some of that we can look at in this year, but they may be considerations as we go into the further budget years. We wanted to really focus on what direction you needed, and I think we're okay, but I'll stand to be corrected on the steps that we're going to take, and you're going to come back with budget allocations, and then we get to really know how this might fit together, and I think that would be a useful step. But there are some people on the list, Councillor Brooks and Bell.
I know that this is quite a costly thing that we've done and are looking to do more, but this accessible vault here, I learned last summer that the recently made accessible porta washrooms are not going to be allowed because they don't have a hand washing facility in that. Is that correct?
What I would say, I think that the accessible washrooms, which we do use, porta potties, might not meet the accessible standards. But that would be something for the industry. That's my understanding. Marta can probably speak more to that. She's more up on the porta potty situation than me.
Sorry. Yeah, accessible porta potties aren't actually accessible as far as accessibility standards go. I can't speak to the hand washing comment, but I do know that we do put accessible porta potties in. They do not actually meet accessibility standards or requirements. You need a 5-foot turning radius within a bathroom, and you don't have that in a porta potty.
Councillor Bell, and then Vino.
Thank you. I'm glad that you had a little list of summary there. It allows us to become more focused. I do think that the Maliga Lake project, it's a facility within the district of MODL. It's not an investment in some other area. So it's important. People have been waiting a long time, and I would certainly support that. And it's not one of the costly projects. But one of the bullets you left off, I think, of your list is a thorough look again at Salt Pit Wharf, because we did the consultation part, the phase. We went out to the public. We put a committee together. There's still a committee together. We did a consultant report. They came back with a blueprint plan, and then we went back to the community and they loved it. So if we do nothing and we enter into a consultation phase for Mark and Wilds Lake, do people really think that we're going to be serious about following through? So we need to, I am fully support of going out to the community and look at these next projects, but we have to be seen of doing something when we've already went to the community multiple times and they were part of it. We need to be credible that we listen to people. And if it requires making an investment into Salt Pit Wharf, good. And I look at it this way. In the northern end, we got River Ridge Common that we've made significant investment in. In the Mark Central, we've done significant investment. But in the southern area, there's not a lot of investment that we did there. If you go down in Mr. Brooks' area. There's a lot of series of little beaches and stuff. But I'm talking about that area between outside of Mahone Bay, going down to Blue Rocks, that whole area. All those people were involved in a really thorough consultation process, and they were very appreciative of us doing that. I don't want to go out to the end of the diving board and then turn and go back.
Yeah, before we go to Councillor Vino, who I can anticipate bringing this up, I didn't leave it off. I saw it as part of the recommendations that Ms. Payne was bringing forward. And the things that I mentioned were things that we had to kind of look at. Where does that fit in the future planning? And some of them we may be able to do in this year, start some of it, but there are really other issues. Yes, and I'm sorry if that wasn't clear, but I absolutely think we've got a plan, and I think that if we are all agreeing to planning, so there is a plan in place for Saw Pit Wharf, we should start following the plan, and I think there was general agreement. I could see heads nodding around the planning piece, so, and now we're at the implementation of some of that, which means going to the engineering plan, so. Councillor Vino.
Thank you, and I think Martin was looking over at my notes, because he said a lot of things that I was going to say, and with the saw pit, the next step being the engineering part, I just want to keep moving with it, not just do this and then wait. Let's put that plan in place till finalization and see that come through. And not talking about saw pit, the 4 things that you had mentioned, Shearbrook, Oxnard, Maliga, and Pine Grove, I'd really like to see Maliga top of that. Coming back to that map again, there's nothing up there that we've invested significant money in, and I'd even put it ahead of Saw Pit, which is saying something, but it wouldn't be much ahead, just a hairline ahead. That needs to come to a forefront. Councillor Huberly's been talking about this for years. The public's getting involved, and we owe that to the residents. And Pine Grove after that as well. And the other 2, Shearbrook and Oxnard. Oxnard, there's nothing there yet. I think we can maybe push that off a little bit. And as far as Shearbrook goes, that'll be my last in the list. It's not in the district. I'd sooner see funds invested in the district, and I know you're going to say something as well. This is where we kind of all do that, but yeah, Maliga Lake needs to come forefront.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I walked in today thinking, I want to concentrate on 25, 26, and hopefully we can talk about what are the criteria for making that plan going forward, because I can see that there's a lot of political maneuvering. And I don't know if that's okay to say at this table, but I'm new to the table, and I just want to go into that plan, the long-term plan, having everything on the table. I want to hear more about the need for the boat launch at Maliga. I'm a Queens County girl. There's I not to say that it's in Queens County, but I have a lot of interest in seeing that go forward. But I feel like there needs to be also some understanding of how we're going into our long-term plan. And the comments about that land for that park being in Chester, we have an MOU. It's just across the boundary. It's one lake. It's accessible from the District of Lunenburg. And it was recommended, it went through a process, it was recommended, and it was accepted and voted on by by a former council. And when I hear people discounting it for that reason, I don't think that's fair. because of the process it went through. And I look forward to a substantive conversation about a long-term plan.
Yeah. So because I'm conscious of time, not that I'm going to cut this off, but I want to ask the question of Ms. Payne. Do you feel you have enough direction for your budget process for this year?
Yes, I do. I think as long as there's no, what we're recommending, I don't hear any X's, and for us to
Okay.
think about some of these other things,
Okay.
I think I do. And if not, Tom will set me correct.
That's the important accomplishment, so thank you all for that. What I think would be useful is, we're going to have another discussion about the longer term. And I think that would be very constructive if we had, if you could help us set some criteria. I think Councillor Smith brought up a really good point. Some of the criteria we should use as a council to consider when we're thinking about long-term plans. And I think that would be very helpful to help frame our discussion, and we'll put it back on a policy and strategy meeting later in the year. We've got a lot to do, folks, over the next bit with budget and allowing public consultation around our budget process. So if you're okay with this, I'm going to ask for some direction on what we should use for criteria, and we can then get into some of the more deep discussion. And with respect to Councillor Moore, we're going to have to go back a little bit to understand, but I know that it was very difficult and on Sherbrooke Lake, but it's been raised, and so we need to recognize that it's been pushed off a bit, so we may as well have the conversation, as difficult as that may be. But it might be helpful to have some criteria how we evaluate us going forward. So I'll put that back to you, not with a timeline, because I know there's a lot to do, and it would be later in the year if we can agree to that. And that will be a discussion about priorities for the next, like going forward, and we'll have to have that before we start getting into budget process, really in our year 2, but it will also factor into our strategic planning exercise that we'll have in November, maybe, that we can start, maybe that could be part of the conversation, have those criteria developed, and then really get into a good conversation later in the year. But I don't want to set expectations that we're going to get through all this in the next couple of months, because I don't think that's realistic for us. So I'll just throw that out there, and as long as Trudy's comfortable with the direction we've given her, and council, you're comfortable that we've given her enough, and then it's going to all come back to us for the real difficult part, which will be after the numbers are on it all. If there's choices we have to make, then we'll have to do it then. So, Councillor Vino?
My comments about eliminating Sherbrooke and Osprey, I was only thinking this year, not down the road. You should be able to go back to your residents and say, this plan is in place, but with that list of 4, I was thinking the next year, not forever, so just wanted to clarify that for you. And I love the idea of a plan in place for Parks and Recreation.
Okay, is there any, Councillor Brooks?
This might be a question for the CAO, but are there, and forgive me because I didn't not familiar with the Sherbrooke Lake project, but are there any legal liabilities with our taxpayers' dollars being spent out of the district?
Thank you for the question, and through the chair. So there's no limit or restriction legally on the ability to invest. So the municipality purchased the land. We would likely be subject to their land use bylaw. So they do have a planned area around the lake. So anything we do would have to be in conjunction with that. And we would highly suggest that consultation take place with the Region of Queens as the host municipality on any action that we move forward.
You mean the municipality of Chester?
Or Chester, sorry. What did I say?
You said Region of Queens. You're
Yes,
going
my
the other
mind's
way.
in Malaga. Yeah, so I happened to be meeting with the interim CAO this afternoon. So I think that there may be political issues with investing in the municipality, but from a legal perspective, the land is owned by the municipality, so it's under the exclusive power of the council to control.
Okay.
Although we do have an MOU, if I could just follow up, sorry, I didn't ask. We do have a MOU that does lay out some of the way that is all to unfold, and it's been a long time since I read that, but we would have to revisit that because I think there were some caveats built into that MOU.
Okay, is there any other comments anyone wants to make? I think we've mapped out what we're going to do, and I appreciate the conversation we've had this morning. I think it tabled some of the issues that needed to be tabled, and I'm really happy we're going to plan. I think that will be really important step in really doing the best we can do with the dollars we have available, and that we'll let our public know what we're going to do with it.
I don't know if I should raise this, but there are projects that I had raised in the 23-25 that we're still working on. And I know it was to set priorities, but I would need direction if we're to continue with some of them or not.
So are you referring to the Mush
Yeah.
washroom?
I guess, yeah, like wayfinding, there's really no discussion because we've awarded the tender.
Right.
We've gotten the Mush washrooms to the point of where we have them designed and we have the change rooms. And as I said, we can cookie cutter them practically in any park. But we purposely haven't went out to tender for that because we
Right.
knew this conversation was happening today. And I guess in the essence of planning, which seems to be, a consensus of theme around planning, my professional recommendation would be, Mush was one of those parks around community consultation. There was some that, people can argue with me that, oh, no, we should be doing consultation with Indian Falls, right? There are some bigger projects that I think that would change perhaps the landscape of the park that we need community consultation, and Mush was one of them. So I'm just wondering, in that vein of planning, is that a project? And I just want direction because I know it's capital dollars, it's already been allocated, it's a project that's already been pre-approved. I'm just seeking clarification.
I'll open it up for comment on that, but I think, there was a general agreement around the table, the importance of planning. Mush, I mean, without a plan there, like you could literally put the bathroom in the wrong place. Anyway, that's just from what I go to that park and I can see how there's a lot there, but I'll open it up for conversation. Councillor Smith and then Moore.
Yeah, sorry, just a couple technical questions on that. If we did, so the money's been allocated to the washrooms?
Yes, so there's money in the budget to do the planning and to actually put it out to tender, assuming the tender comes in within the budget. I mean, we've experienced things like that before when we've tendered and it's come way over and council's decided not to proceed. So yes, there's money to actually construct them in this year's budget.
So I just, since this is already in progress and it was already approved, if we do the consultation and planning around the park, which I agree is really important, especially since we've had this audit done, would the money be there in reserve for that project?
Again, that would have to be a decision of
That we could-
council of whether you put anything in reserves, but if we're budgeting from year to year, I would suggest that if we do Mush and we do consultation and we have a plan, very similar to Saw Pit Wharf, when you look at your implementation, you would budget accordingly to make sure that that implementation plan happened. So I guess I don't know if that answers your question. What I would be proposing is if that's the route that you want, we would go do the planning, we'd bring back the plan with the costing, and then council would make a decision moving forward. And it looks like Alex wanted to say something.
Just maybe feeding into our budget conversations, most of our capital projects are funded via grants and from reserve. And so your capital budget, I don't have the figures in front of me, but I'm assuming that we were drawing from reserves to pay for the washroom at Mush Park. So if that money goes unspent, the transfer out of reserve never happened. So that remains available for future capital projects. And what you're doing effectively each year is looking at what are your year one priorities? What are you actually budgeting for that capital year? But your capital plan extends 5 years. So unless council wants to be highly specific because there's something attached to that project, staff wouldn't have any other recommendations there. You let that money stay in reserve, and then your future year's plans would include consultation for the Mush Park, which would then include those accessible washroom and change rooms.
Councillor Moore.
Through you to Trudy, can you remind me the budget for the washrooms at the Mush?
The budget overall was 190,000.
Right.
And that was for design and construction.
Yeah.
And if I could just, we feel after having gone through the design process that that's going to be inadequate.
Inadequate?
Inadequate. So we're hesitant to go to tender as well, knowing that it's going to go over budget.
Right.
And going out to market with contractors and they're bidding on things and not being awarded things, you can only do that so many times, and we have
Right.
done that a couple of times in the last year, so we're hesitant to want to do that. So
Right.
another approach is to put it, to get a better estimate now that the design is nearly in completion, and put it in for this capital budget of 25-26 and have a discussion around the priorities, because it is, like Councillor Bell said, it is sort of piecemeal approach to, without community consultation. So maybe put it in to the priority for the next budget year. We're almost there now. And to decide if that's a project we want to go ahead with. But we've been really reluctant to go to tender with it, and having so many unsettled things about it.
If I may.
You're next.
Okay. But this summer, there still will be bathrooms. Yeah.
There's still vault toilets there.
Vault toilets.
It's not
and-
that we wouldn't have
Right.
toilets. It was to create a design.
Right.
Build a nicer vault toilet,
Right.
I guess, if I
Yeah.
can use that terminology.
Right.
And the way that the engineering department has approached it with the design is that if we go, for example, at Miller Point Peace Park, a lot of our vault toilets are not accessible.
Right.
But this could be, the design around how, around all parks that would have a
Right.
similarity about washrooms, which again reflects back in our park standards, that you're providing, when you go to a vault toilet at River Ridge, if there was one there, if you go at Miller, there's some consistency.
And remind me again, vault toilet, how the water, is it potable water?
There is no, it is a glorified outhouse. To
Okay.
put it in simple language, is you go in and you have your hand sanitizer.
yeah.
There's no flush.
Right.
But it's different than a porta potty where the vault is part of it. As
Right.
the porta potty moves, they stay in the structure. The vault is in the
Okay.
ground based
Yep.
on environmental standards.
Right.
Then we have companies come and, maintain them.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Oikel and then Brooks.
So, from what I'm gathering then, your recommendation is not to proceed, that's how I'm interpreting, not to proceed until after we do have public consultation, if we choose to do that with Mush Mush.
Exactly. That
Okay.
is our recommendation, taking that planning lens. We've seen it's a success at River
Yeah.
Ridge. Hopefully, we'll see the success at Saw Pit, and yeah.
Okay, Councillor Brooks and then Vino.
Just to go back to the idea of accessible porta potties, to your knowledge, and this I'm asking you, Marta, because I think you might know this, there is no one in the province who's currently manufacturing accessible porta potties that do meet the current standards?
I can't comment on that. I know that the ones that we are using in this district are not accessible.
So I think one of the things that I'd like to see is for there to be a product search. Because I can tell you as a builder, the cost difference between a porta potty and a vault is just dramatically different. So the answer, we don't know, is probably a good one to find out. We should probably find out if there are, because we could probably give some access, some accessible washroom at a cost if we find a solution that's not a standalone vault. So I'd be curious to know. And if there isn't, I'd also be curious to have conversations with the individuals in this province who are building them, because I'd think that they might be keen to get part of the business of a fully accessible and up to standard product. So I'm curious about all of that.
Councillor Vino.
Boy, former Councillor Staton would be up in her chair right now. That's what the previous council made a commitment for washrooms. The public is expecting washrooms. I hate to go back and say, we changed our mind, we're doing public consultation, and then we'll decide. It's out in the public now that washrooms are coming based on what we've done. I would like to see that go forward for that community.
Kind of goes against our idea about planning, which you've been very committed to, Councillor
Yes.
Vino.
But this was a previous commitment that the council made. We made that commitment during that time. So I don't see it as going against our plan, because we've already committed to that.
But there isn't a plan for Mushamash.
There is for washrooms, though. There was for washrooms.
But that's
to be
out of the
there.
context. I'm
Yeah.
just raising this
Yeah.
because the idea for the planning was that, like Saw Pit Wharf, you'd have a concept plan with a clear delineation of where the various services would be within the park, which is where washrooms would be located, amongst other services. I just raised that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it'll be consensus.
Yeah.
That's just,
Yeah.
that's how I feel on washrooms for Mush.
Okay, are there other comments on that? Councillor Moore.
Yeah, like I said, if somebody was here, it would not be good. I voted in favor on the, I remember now, the $190, because the first one, $190,000, because the first one was $500,000. $500,000 for an outhouse is quite a bit of money, I think. Yeah. And I understand we're not going out to tender because we know it's going to come in over budget. We're pretty sure. Is there any way that we could just save that 190, just take that 190 and do something more just within that budget for the interim with the 190? We'd have to go back to get a design that would fit into the 190,000, correct? We have the design, but they know it's going to come in over.
That's called piecemeal.
And I guess.
Councillor Hubley.
Okay.
We seem to always be backtracking, like we're doing something quickly, we're not doing it right, we're going back, we're correcting it, and I don't see the problem with doing this the right way. Going back out, getting public consultation, making sure we're doing it right. There are currently washrooms there, and I know that the former counselor is not going to be happy, but I believe we need to do it the right way. It's just wasting money to do it quick, do it now, and do it wrong, and have to correct it later on.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I guess this is why I raised the question of, putting money in reserve, is that we made the commitment. So we made the funding commitment. The community is expecting that. I see the need for, I hear the justification for doing public consultation and a solid plan so that we're not like, oops, we should have put it somewhere else. Like, that makes sense to me. But it's about timelines. Like, does this just go back into, the mix and get, lost in priorities around other, consultations that are coming? I would just like some kind of commitment that we do the consultation, we have the plan, and then we get right to it because we've already committed to it.
Can we do the consultation in the and I guess this will be a question to come forward, because I think you're hearing still a commitment to plan, but a need to make sure we do it sooner than later? Can you balance that out in your budget?
Well, I think that we can bring it back. What I would suggest if we're going to do a consultation around the Mark and Wiles Lake, we add MUSH to that consultation. And that will impact your budget, because when you're hiring a consultant to do 1, 2, or 3, and the reason why we were saying Mark and Wiles Lake, because we were really sticking with our regional parks and bringing those up to a standard.
But with all respect, there were a couple of other parks, Saw Pit Wharf and Mush, that were also in play. So, Councillor DeLong.
Washrooms at Mush have become very contentious over time. I think that they are part of our accessibility audit. Was it mentioned in the survey that was conducted there? I think we made a commitment to do this.
Specifically
It
at
needs to
Mush.
get done. No, okay.
It wasn't specifically at MUSH, it was washrooms overall. In our survey, Marta can probably speak to that better than I can.
I read every survey and all the comments that came in because of the conversations around bathrooms at MUSH was such a hot topic at that time around the council table. And no, we didn't have comments specifically about bathrooms at MUSH.
Okay.
There were comments about bathrooms, but it was more about just needing them more, which we did. We've done that. We put bathrooms now in porta potties in all of our parks. But not specifically was there comments about bathrooms at MUSH. Change rooms at MUSH was definitely something that we heard. but not-
Which was going to be incorporated
Which
into
is
the
part of the
vault
bathroom
toilet
project.
area. And
Yeah.
I think, council committed to it. We put money aside for it. I would like to see it done.
Alex, and then Hubley, and then we're gonna wrap this up.
It might be helpful to point out that the discussion that you're having right now is about deciding which ones you're gonna plan for. And you're doing it absent of the criteria that you've asked staff to develop. So I'm not sure if you're gonna make much more progress on that particular discussion. If council is quite concerned that an improvement to the washroom, change room facilities at Mush is a commitment you've made and you want to demonstrate continued commitment, you do have that option of us putting in an earmark for reserves, which we don't want huge amounts of those, because then you end up with all kinds of tied up mini pockets of reserves. But if it's truly important to council, the way that you can show your commitment continues is to earmark that for reserves. We can bring that forward for you in an option for the budget discussions. And it's not a significant amount considering the size of your overall capital budget, which will then allow you to have your conversation after budget about what's your criteria for prioritizing the planning of parks and then proceeding with those investments.
Councillor Hubley?
I'm okay.
I thought we were all kind of.
I'm sorry that I.
No, it is important, and it is important. And, I think there's some mixed feeling around the table about, commitments that have been previously made. I think an important point is to say that for the money that was set aside, that it's likely not adequate. That is concerning. So I'm not sure where we're at in terms of direction for you, but I would like us to come back when you bring that budget back and just put in some direction about the costing of a consultation process and what the timeline might look like related to that. And then we'll have to weigh out whether we want to do that or not. But I think we need that piece. I think there's a general feeling here that we didn't want that to fall down on the list, so it needs to be higher up on the list and look at what steps could be taken in this year. And yes, there was commitment made by a previous council, but that doesn't mean we're not abandoning it. We are just asking that that there be a good plan in place. And I think that's what we'll have to make a decision about, is whether, when the budget comes in, whether we want to take the step to plan in this budget year, or whether we want to look at putting those bathrooms in, I think. Does that give you enough to go on? We'll have to make choice there.
Yeah, I think so. What I'm hearing is to build it into the budget with the timeline process, And then you can make decisions of whether you're going to build, and then maybe perhaps Stephen could think about, just a suggestion of what a more reflective cost would be if we
Right.
went ahead with it, as opposed to the 190.
Right.
So I think we can look at it from the two ends, if that's,
I think that kind of captures, because there's not really consensus here, and I think we need that information to make probably a good decision, and people will have had time to think about it a little bit more when we get to those budget consultation. Are councillors okay with this direction? Okay. All right. I want to thank the staff, because I know we're asking a lot in terms of kind of our little different approach to how we deal with getting ourselves to budget. But I think this was a really good conversation in terms of people's level of understanding about what we're trying to achieve, and a good collective discussion about how we think we should go forward. I don't think we've got it all figured out by any means, but we've asked for some criteria, how we can evaluate going forward for a long-range plan, and we've set out some guidelines for what we want to achieve for your budget input and what will come back to us. So I want to thank the staff and also councillors who really contributed a lot to the conversation and helped with those who have no knowledge of the history, but also that's been very helpful in how we view going forward. Is there anything else anyone wants to add before we conclude this meeting? Okay, thank you very much.
thank you.